Hey guys, it's Jessica.
And this is Kendra, and you're listening to
Lucid Lab.
So I just had like one of the most amazing meals last night in downtown Denver. It's restaurant week.
Yes, I love restaurant week.
And I've lived in Colorado for, I don't know, going on 15 years, and I've never been. For those of you who aren't from Denver, I'm sure other cities do this too. I think it's for charity, like it goes back to the food banks. But all of the restaurants put together like a special fixed menu, and it's one price, and you get to try like appetizers and entrees and desserts, and you eat way more food than you would ever eat any other time.
Yeah. We have so many restaurants here, so
Right?
many good restaurants, and a lot of them are too expensive. And so that's what's cool about Denver Restaurant Week, because you get to go try these like really expensive restaurants for this little fixed 3 to 4 course menu that they do for this week. And that's how I've been able to eat at a lot of nice places that I wouldn't go to otherwise.
It's true. Yeah. Like what I paid for myself last night for all of that probably would have been the same cost for like one plate.
Exactly.
If I went there normally.
Yeah. Yep.
It's really cool. I'm hoping other places are doing it too. That's kind of been the highlight of my week, I guess. I haven't really done much else. Food is always a highlight of my week.
Food is always a highlight. I was eating when she showed up and she's like, ooh, I want to eat too. I was like, there we go. We're going to eat.
And now we're surrounded by all of our drinks.
I know. So many drinks.
Eat and drink.
Well, I went on a walk last night for the first time in forever. So it was nice to get out, and it was at night, but it's okay.
The weather was really nice yesterday.
It was nice yesterday.
It was like 64 when I got home at like 8 o'clock last night. It was still 64 degrees. I'm like, it is springtime.
Oh, I know. And speaking of weather, we have to talk about Tuesday.
Oh my God. Tuesday was insanity.
I woke up and I'm getting my daughter ready for school. We get in the car. It's like, I don't know.
Normal morning.
Totally fine outside. Like 3 minutes into the drive, it starts snowing a little bit. I was prepared for it to snow a little bit that day, so that didn't surprise me. But I get to her school and it is downpouring snow. Like crazy. You can't get it off of your windshield.
It's like whiteout conditions.
It was insane. It dropped like 6 inches of snow in a matter of 15 minutes.
Yeah, they call it a snow squall.
It took me like 25 minutes to get home from her school, and we're really close.
Yeah, and it happened right at school drop-off. Like
right
the worst possible, or the morning commute for people who didn't have kids. Like anybody trying to get to or from Denver, it just like dumped in a really dangerous fashion. Like it went off on my phone and it was like, alert, snow squall. And I'm like, what is this?
Blizzard in 2 seconds.
And then it left. And then it was sunny the rest of the day.
And then when I went out to my car later, because I had to go pick her up, I'm like, oh, I have to get off the snow all off my car.
It's gone.
No snow. No snow. It just disappeared. I was all gone.
I had gotten up to let my dog out, which our dog is an all black German Shepherd. And I opened the door and I just let him out. And I saw it was snowing a little bit, didn't think anything of it. I went to get him 5 minutes later and he looked like a white.
Oh my gosh.
Like one of those white fluffy dogs, because it was so much.
I guess what happened is such a rare thing that it was even on the news in New Mexico, where my family lives. They were like, you were on the news. I was like, well, it was crazy.
Yeah. You never know what's going to happen here. That's why I keep saying I am like cautiously excited for spring, because I know at any moment we could have 2 feet of snow still.
I know.
Until June, essentially.
Yeah, right. Yep. Yep.
Well, I want to go ahead and jump into this episode because I have a feeling it's going to be a long one today.
Okay. Let's do it.
So today I am telling the story of Betty Gore and Candy Montgomery.
I knew you were doing Candy Montgomery and this whole time, because you had mentioned that Jessica Biel was in it. And I was like, oh, I know what you're talking about, but this whole time I was picturing the Sinner series on Netflix. So I thought it was that story. And then I was looking at something on Hulu yesterday, and then there was like this big picture of Jessica Biel and it said Candy. And I was like, oh, that's what you mean. And no, I don't know anything about this. So I'm excited now, because I thought I knew the story a little bit.
I'm really excited that you don't know anything about it, because it's a wild tale, and I am hoping there's some listeners out there who don't know the story either. I had a long plane flight around Christmas time, and I was just looking for something to watch, and I came across the HBO series called Love and Death.
Okay.
And it is also the story of Candy Montgomery and Betty Gore, and it was released about, I think, 6 months after Hulu's Candy.
Oh,
so there were 2 series released in the last year, and they're both very good. I ended up binging both of them because I was like, I can't get enough of this story.
So they're both series?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And the one on HBO, Elizabeth Olsen plays Candy Montgomery.
Oh.
And there's some other actresses and actors that you'll recognize that play other characters. I don't want to give too much away of the story, but really well done. And that's what sucked me in. And I was like, this is a story that I want to discuss with Jessica because there is so much to it. Let's just get into it.
Cool. I'm excited.
So another reason I was drawn to this story is because it happens in Texas.
Oh, okay.
Watching the series was kind of nostalgic. It also happens in the 1980s.
Oh.
I grew up in Texas in the 1980s, so a lot of that just like called to me.
I was born there in the 1980s. Does that count?
Kind of. Actually, I was born literally 2 days after this crime took place.
Are you the reincarnation of her?
I could be. So on Friday the 13th, June 13th, to be exact, 1980, in the small town of Wylie, Texas, a country suburb of Dallas, Betty Gore was found murdered in her home. This was a town that had never had a murder.
Oh.
Not only was it the first murder for Wylie, Texas, but it was done in the most brutal of ways. You see, she was hacked to death by an axe.
Oh, that's not a good one.
And not just once or twice. She had been struck 41 times.
Yikes.
Mostly to her face.
Oh, there had to have been nothing left.
There wasn't much. It was a brutal scene for anyone who came upon it. This happened after Stephen King's The Shining movie came out, where he chased his family with the axe. And so there was thought this has to be some wacko out there
trying to be him
the movie.
Just because it's an axe?
That was the headlines. Axe murder, Wylie, Texas, The Shining, copycat.
Whoa.
All of that.
That's a reach.
Everyone was invested in following the story. And just 10 days after Betty Gore's murder, they arrested a suspect. The suspect was none other than her best friend, Candy Montgomery, a 29-year-old housewife that everyone in the community knew and loved. She was a pillar of the community, top in her church, and Betty and Candy's girls were best friends too.
Ooh, a lot of drama we're going to unfold, I'm assuming.
Lots of drama here. What could lead to such a brutal murder between two friends? The most shocking piece came out several days after Candy's arrest that Candy had been having an affair with Betty's husband, Alan Gore.
Okay.
Could that have been what caused this murder?
Well, what else would it be?
It got even more shocking when Candy did not plead not guilty. She said, yes, I did kill Betty. It was in self-defense.
Whoa.
41 times.
Yeah.
With an axe, self-defense.
Well, there's always that argument where it could have started as self-defense, but then she just kept going.
Perhaps overkill.
Way overkill.
That's just a teaser. I'm going to get into all of the details, but I just want to set it up. What the hell happened here? We don't know because only one woman is alive to tell the story. And I want to bring that up because I have read many, many stories. I've been on Reddit threads. I've watched both documentaries and I've read a book. I was really into this case. And I feel like everything focuses on Candy, but I want to make sure when I tell this story that we bring up Betty more because I don't think she's brought up enough.
Because all we have is Candy's word.
Yes.
Nobody's speaking on Betty's behalf.
And the thing is that Candy and Betty couldn't be two more different people. Candy was the very vivacious, out there, everybody loved her. Betty was the quiet one that really was kind of blunt in the way that she approached people, and she wasn't liked as much. Okay. And I feel like there is some of that going on that people just, she was easy to dislike, and so she's dismissed. And I want to hopefully bring a different side to this story.
Okay.
I also will start with a disclaimer. If you have watched Candy or Love and Death, remember that that was based on a true story. And there's a lot of things in the documentary that aren't necessarily true, as I found out when I did the actual research. There's a lot of things added in there for drama and effect. So if you have watched those documentaries, kind of throw them out of your mind right now and listen to my story.
Well, they're not really true documentaries.
That's the hard part about some of these recreations of true crime is that it takes you in one direction that wasn't necessarily the truth. They over dramatized the affair. They actually made some things completely up, which bothers me.
And that's what they do. Yeah.
And I bring this disclaimer up because I got into some Reddit threads and people get mean on Reddit, and somebody brought up a fact from one of these series that wasn't even true, and they were like, this is why Candy's a horrible person, and they brought up this fact, and I'm like, that was from the dramatization show. That wasn't part of her character. So
I told you, those Reddit threads, people
gotta be
on
careful.
the internet, it's rough.
Always be careful where you get your information. So, as we always do, we have to start with who these people were, how they came to be in Dallas together, and how Betty and Candy even became friends. And I want to start with Betty Gore because she's the victim. Betty Eileen Pomeroy was born in Norwich, Kansas on January 9th, 1950 to Bob and Bertha Pomeroy. She was the couple's first child, and she was the only girl in the family. She had 2 younger brothers, Ronnie and Richard. Her father was a farmer in this rural Kansas town of only 414 people, so very small town.
Small one.
He was well respected in the town, and therefore so was the whole Pomeroy family. Betty was a beautiful baby. She was voted as such in the town when she was only 3 years old, prettiest child or something.
No.
She had very unique features. She had dark hair and dark eyes. She was said not to be a classic beauty, but there was just something about her that drew people in, especially as she got older and the boys started noticing.
That's how it goes.
It is. And also at age 13, she began keeping a diary, and this was actually shared with the journalists. So they had her diary entries to look at and kind of give a glimpse into who Betty was.
Okay.
She was very popular in school. She was voted as VP of Student Council. She played the clarinet, and she was guard on the girls' basketball team.
Kind of a mixture of me and you right there.
Yeah, I know. I did the band. I did not do basketball. But as she got into high school, she left that all behind and she became very focused on the Methodist Church youth group instead of school activities.
Okay.
Everyone who knew Betty in Norwich described her as pleasant, optimistic, and they said she just had an ambitious thing about her. They knew she was not one that was going to stay in that small town.
True Capricorn right there.
Right.
Yep. I was the only one that left.
It's true, huh?
Yep.
I'm a Gemini. We never stay anywhere. So we're floating all the time.
Sienna Ibiza next week.
Like I said before, Betty was a girl that never lacked a boyfriend, and there were many journal entries about her different loves over the years before she graduated high school. She talks of riding in cars with boys, which just makes me think of the Drew Barrymore movie.
Oh, mm-hmm.
It was small town Kansas. That's what you did.
Yeah.
You just rode around in cars, and then you'd go somewhere and make out. When she was in her senior year of high school, her parents let her take a trip with some friends to the Ozarks, and that's when she got a taste for what life could be like outside of Kansas. She even met a boy there.
Of course she did.
And they had a little rendezvous. That caused her to break up with Jimmy, who was her long-term boyfriend, high school sweetheart
Jimmy.
of 10 months.
Jimmy is such a back then
Jimmy.
high school name.
Yes.
Jimmy.
Her parents would later describe 1968 as the year they felt their daughter was at her happiest. She was even voted as homecoming queen, and her parents remembered fondly and shared pictures with the journalists of her big night that senior year. And then she took off for college at Southwestern College in Winfield, Kansas, which was several hours away from home.
So she didn't leave Kansas yet.
No, but I mean, that's normal to go to college in the state you grow up in because tuition's cheaper.
Yeah.
It was at college that Betty would meet Alan Gore. You see, Betty was really horrible at math. And Alan was a senior at Southwestern. He was working as a teaching assistant in freshman math. He noticed Betty right away. She had a beautiful smile. That was something I didn't mention earlier. Everyone said that she just beamed when she would smile.
Yeah.
He noticed her smile and he loved how she would speak up in class and ask questions. But Alan was a really shy guy. He wasn't the type that would ever ask a girl out. So Betty was the one to make the first move.
Wow.
She did that by asking him for a one-on-one tutoring session. And he said, yes, I'll help you with passing math. And when she got too flirtatious, he said, this isn't appropriate. I'm your teacher.
No, he was just a dude in her class, right?
No, he was a teacher assistant.
Oh, yeah, but that doesn't really count.
I know. He was still a college student. It's not like he was a 40-year-old. He was only 3 years older than her, so nothing crazy. She respected that. But when he moved out of that role and she wasn't in the class anymore, they did start dating.
Okay.
Betty was the first girl Alan had ever dated.
Oh.
And he thought she just was perfect and the kind of girl that he should marry. So a little background about Alan, because he will become an important piece to the story. Alan grew up as a farm boy in a Kansas town just 3 counties west of where Betty grew up. He was born in 1947 to a family of very hard workers. In fact, he said he rarely saw his father. His dad was very reserved and didn't talk much even when he was home, which wasn't often. He worked from dusk until dawn. And Alan kind of picked that up from his dad, and he began working as a paid farmhand by age 10. Some would even say he was taught and embraced workaholism.
Screw workaholism.
Yeah, what's the point?
I'm one of them. That's why I say it. I'm allowed to say that.
Capricorn. I couldn't find when Alan was actually born, so I don't know what his zodiac sign is.
It would be interesting to know.
I could find out the women's birth dates, but not the husbands.
Weird.
Nobody cares about the husbands.
No, I bet you could find it on Ancestry.com. There's a lot of information there.
Yeah. I mean, I read this book, which was the most extensive of anything, and they didn't have their birth dates. They just had the women. He was described as not a complete loner, but also wasn't very popular, just average kid in high school. He played basketball, but he spent most of his time on the bench. He was an okay student, but not top of the class. And he had one older sister, Beth. And when she went off to Southwestern College, it gave him the idea that he should probably do the same one day. He saved money from his work during high school, and he took on several jobs in order to pay the tuition. He was working in the cafeteria. He was working in the mailroom. And then when...
Teacher assistant?
Yeah, that's when Betty met him. That's why he was doing that.
Yeah, because at first I kind of had the idea that he was this like whiz, but now it just sounds like not really.
No.
Okay.
He's just an average dude. He chose to become a math major after a professor of statistics just took an interest in him and said, hey, maybe you should do this. So I feel like Alan was not a guy that had like a clear direction for where he wanted to go with his life, which is very opposite of Betty. I'm going to go back and talk about her more because she knew what she wanted to do. She knew she didn't want to be in Kansas, and she knew she wanted to go to college.
Yeah.
Which was a big deal, actually, because nobody in her family had ever gone to college before.
Neither in my family. I was the first to go to college.
So that just speaks to who Betty was. This was a woman who had big plans for her life.
Yeah.
It was these qualities about Betty that attracted Alan to her. And for a man that had no experience with women, he fell hard for Betty. She was opposite of him in many ways. She was more of that social butterfly. She was so happy and optimistic, and she was beautiful.
Yeah.
So that never hurts, right? He was attracted to how ambitious she was.
I'm already seeing a red flag kind of here, because that's one thing that I've always come in contact with is a man can be super excited that you're ambitious, and they're like, wow, look at her, like put you on a pedestal. It's scary when it turns around and they literally want you to stop doing everything.
It happens a lot.
It happens all the time. And I'm like, but you liked me because I was ambitious, and now you don't want me to do anything.
They want to cage the pretty exotic bird. I've heard it described that way.
Keep
they want to have it to themselves, but they don't want it out there for other men to be attracted to. I do think some of that might have been going on here, and we'll get into it more because we're going to see Betty change a lot. That's why I wanted to make sure everyone knew who she was.
Yeah.
In college, he supported her, and he told her how much he admired her ambition at a time when most women were not aspiring for outside jobs. This was the 60s. I guess some women were starting to branch out. If a woman did go to college, it was usually just to find a husband they'd never work.
It's all about what was socially acceptable then.
Yes.
And especially in smaller areas, family values or whatever, or what your parents taught you, what they expect you to do.
But I will say, and we'll talk about Betty's family, I think her parents were very proud of their daughter and really wanted her to have a happy life. And I feel bad for them with what all is going to happen, because her parents loved her.
She was their only daughter.
Proud, especially her dad. She sounded like a real daddy's girl. While they were dating, it was a very kind of monotonous relationship. Nothing like, there weren't fireworks going off. They were really just laying around the house and talking. They were going to the library. They spent a lot of time at the movies. They didn't really go out socially. I feel like Alan was kind of this socially awkward person, and so it was easier for them to just hang out, the two of them, which might have been the start of us seeing Betty kind of change.
Yeah.
I haven't described Alan yet. I told you Betty was beautiful at this age. Alan was not.
Okay.
He was not what I would describe as handsome. He was described as being very plain, and he had horn-rimmed glasses, which was popular back at that time. And even at the age of just 21, he already had a receding hairline.
Oh, got the bad genes.
Poor guy. He can't help that.
I know.
When Betty brought him home to meet her family and hometown friends, they were all a little shocked that this is the man she had chosen, considering she could have had her pick of any man. Many guys wanted to date her, and they were kind of like, why is she wanting this guy?
Because there was something exotic about the fact that he was in this kind of teacher position.
I think that's what it was. And also, he didn't come after her. Maybe she was just
so
used to...
And he even told her she was being inappropriate.
Maybe. If you're a woman that's always having men coming and asking you out, he seemed more challenging, maybe.
Yeah,
she had to ask him out. So she felt like she accomplished something.
You don't want me? Are you crazy?
She's like, everybody wants me. Have you seen me?
There is a level of control with that because it seemed like she had a good head on her shoulders, but she was in this la la land where she probably did feel like, oh, I'm amazing, you know, because she had nothing to combat that yet. And then here's this guy who's like, maybe. And she's like, whoa. So now I need to make sure that he likes me because otherwise everything I think is a lie.
And this is why sometimes you see these beautiful women who have everything going for them end up with complete losers.
It's true.
So even though her family and friends didn't think that Alan was what they would have pictured for Betty, he seemed to make her happy and they trusted her judgment.
A lot of parents will agree to whoever their child wants to be with because they don't want to lose their children.
I know. And unfortunately, your kids end up with people you don't like sometimes.
My poor mother has seen it all. She has 6 kids and she watched all of us have fucked up relationships. You have to be supportive even though in your heart you're like, no, this isn't going anywhere good.
So on May 16th, 1969, Betty made her last entry in her little diary she had been keeping since age 13. It said, I received Alan Gore's ring. Alan graduated May 25th with a major in business and math. That was all. It wasn't very passionate, but basically this was the announcement that Betty and Alan were engaged.
And now I don't have a life, so I won't write in this book anymore.
And that was the thing I read is from age 13 until this last journal entry, she had written at least a sentence every single day.
Wow, that's crazy.
So is that how we feel as women, that you get engaged and it's done?
To change. You let go of parts of you. We should be able to live authentically ourselves at all times.
Always. So Alan enrolled in Kansas State University for graduate school and Betty transferred there. She was not going to give up her dream.
Well, that's good.
Even though she was getting married, she was going to finish her degree. I love that. They lived a very meager existence on Alan's salary as a graduate teaching assistant.
That sounded miserable, the way you said that.
A meager existence.
Yeah.
They married officially on January 25th, 1970. Betty was 20 years old and Alan was 23. So their amazing honeymoon was 2 days in a motel in Hutchinson, Kansas.
Aw.
They didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, at least they got away.
While they were at Kansas State, Alan took up an interest in computer analysis, which was a hot and growing field at the time. So he decided instead of being a statistician, he was going to switch to computer analysis, which was a really good choice for his career.
It's a good choice for a lot of people. Still.
Yeah. With that, he secured a job in New Mexico once he graduated from Kansas State. And once again, Betty transferred her enrollment to continue her education at New Mexico State University.
Oh, so now we're going to my actual area.
So now we're in New Mexico. We're going everywhere. Kansas, New Mexico, and eventually Texas.
Why do we always end up in these states
I don't know.
that we're from?
Because that's where all the crimes happen, I guess.
That's true.
Now, this was when we start seeing something happen with Betty. She started getting mysterious illnesses. She had just gotten married. We know she stopped writing in her diary, and now she was getting these odd stomach pains, and she kept going to the doctors, and nobody could diagnose her with anything except spastic stomach.
She sounds just like me, honestly. A lot of these things are lining up. It's kind of scaring me.
I hope I'm not going to murder you with an axe.
Oh, God. It's okay, but you can't cheat on anyone with.
Yeah, that's true. We don't have any husbands to cheat with, so we're good.
Now we know what our Halloween outfits are going to be.
Totally. At one point, the doctors wanted to take her appendix out because they didn't know what else to do. And she was like, no, I don't want to do that. We will see. This will be the beginning of a long line of strange illnesses that are going to plague Betty into the future.
This is literally me. Like, I have had issues my entire life, and they mainly started around this age. Like, I was 20, 21.
You know what happened to me around age 19 is when anxiety came with a full force, and I had panic disorder so bad. And I wonder if it's just something with like that age, like our hormones, or is it just that like our girlhood is over and we're switching into adult and like our body
responsibilities.
Some of the thoughts with Betty and all of her illnesses is that it is going to have a tie to mental health disorders.
Also heard that Capricorns in general have stomach issues. So there's something about the time of year we're born. I wonder why. Someone look into that and let me know. I just heard it.
So life was good while they were living in Las Cruces, other than these stomach ailments. Alan began making a decent salary and Betty was finishing up her student teaching. But this is where another problem that would plague their marriage started. Alan had a job that he had to travel for work. And this wasn't just 1 or 2 nights. He would be gone for 6 weeks at a time.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's
that's a long time.
Yeah.
And Betty didn't like this. They were in New Mexico. It was just the two of them. She didn't know anyone. And being alone was very hard for her. She would whine and cry every night on the phone when they talked. She would beg him to come home early.
What was he doing? I mean, my dad's a computer guy and he travels, but never for that long. I'm trying to figure out like what kind of stuff he was doing.
What I could find out, it sounds like he was going and like setting up full systems. He was kind of like a consultant. I had an uncle who did this. He was some computer guy in Oklahoma, and he would be gone all the time for long trips. But his wife liked it.
I know, there's a difference.
She's like, get out the wine. My husband's gone for 2 weeks.
It's hard when you're completely alone, though.
I think that was the hard part here is she went from this small town where everybody knew her. She had all these close friends, and now she's isolated. And her husband's gone, and she's having all these stomach issues.
Yeah. I would say that a lot of that probably was tied to anxiety. Then,
I think it was anxiety.
Yeah.
Now, while Alan was away, perhaps to ease her loneliness and anxiety, she did something that is described as very uncharacteristic of Betty. She went home with a younger college student one night for a little one-night stand. Seems very out of character for her. When Alan returned home from his business trip, she confessed within 2 days she felt so much guilt, and she begged him for his forgiveness. Alan was hurt, but he also seemed to just get over it really quickly.
He's
and they
probably
just moved
fucking
on.
a bunch of girls on his trip then.
I don't think so.
Really?
He's not attractive, and he's very fucking awkward. So we're going to find out more. Alan's definitely not a guy who's able to get girls.
Okay.
I don't think he was. Betty graduated in 1973 with her teaching degree. And like I said, this was a big deal. Her family came out to New Mexico to celebrate with her, being the only one who'd ever graduated. Her family was very proud of her.
Yeah.
Alan then took on a new job, and they moved to Plano, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas. After this move, Betty began to experience illness again. She would see a doctor often with various complaints of a sore throat, stomach problems, earaches, allergies, fevers. She was struggling and on many medications. They would give her different things, just trying to find out what was wrong with her. And during this time, one of the office visits, they realized that she was pregnant.
Okay.
Alan and Betty were excited because they always wanted children, even though it wasn't planned. But here's the problem. Pregnancy drove Betty into a full-blown depression.
Oh, no. And she
was
kind of
one
there.
of those girls that postpartum was really bad for her.
No.
The symptoms she had been experiencing off and on since she was 20 could be described as psychosomatic or anxiety driven. She was suffering from mental health problems at a time when medical facilities they weren't equipped to deal with it or know what was really going on. So I feel for her because I've been there.
It does seem like such a dramatic shift from what she was to who she is now.
The Gores joined a local church, and Betty began to make friends, which helped her. At this point in their marriage, it seemed like their roles had kind of reversed because within the church, we see Alan become like Mr. Church leader, outgoing, wants to hang out with all of the couples, and Betty is like shrinking.
Yep.
He's not supporting her, in my opinion.
That's how a lot of this goes. You see so many women who come out who, like, against everything they've learned, leave like their husbands because the men get propped up on this pedestal in the church and the women become nothing.
Yes, because that's what the Christian religion teaches. It's very patriarchal. And I know growing up in small town Texas church, it's like men had all the roles and women were just there to like teach Bible school and take care of the kids.
Just because they were men.
Yes.
Doesn't matter if they had any ability or skills and whatever that was.
And they were your spiritual guider, and they were supposed to be the leaders of the home. And many of those men were not equipped to be the true leaders of the home.
No.
And I don't think Alan was.
It's just giving power away. I don't understand.
Things did seem to get better when their daughter Alyssa was born. And Betty also received her first full-time position as a second grade teacher. But it was short-lived because Alan took a job again and started traveling.
That might have helped her being around happy kiddos.
Well,
unless it was stressing her out, because it would stress me out.
I couldn't teach.
I cannot.
In fact, now that you brought that up, she struggled because the school that she was hired in to teach second grade had an open style classroom, which was kind of big back in the 80s in Texas, where you would like move from class to class. And it was like a more...
That's what my daughter does now.
Well, that was new back then, and she wanted her own classroom.
Where you just stay there.
Something about Betty that I found when researching this is I think she has a very black and white view. Maybe it's the Capricorn. She wants things to be just so, and she wants to kind of control those outcomes like within her room. And she also had this like deep need for justice, for right and wrong. So she would discipline the kids. She expected them to, respect each other. And she couldn't handle sometimes when it would get a little crazy.
Yeah.
And some of the parents started complaining about Betty on how she was running her classroom, and the students didn't necessarily like her. So this career that she had always dreamed of having was not.
But she also changed.
I think so. You wonder.
You changed. The control when it comes to a Capricorn, it's not even about control. It's about stability. I think Capricorns crave stability at all times. And so when things are not going as planned, it's disruptive.
And that could be why him traveling all the time.
Yeah.
It took her away from her routine.
Right. Yeah.
And now she's at home with a baby and he's on the road all the time.
Yeah.
I look at Betty Gore and I think back to the Andrea
I know.
Yates.
I was just thinking about Andrea.
There's a lot of parallels here.
Right.
And it was once again a husband that maybe, I don't think he was vindictively not supporting her. He just didn't give her the attention she needed. He got know
the prize
what to do.
And just, someone looked at him and they're like, we're going to pay you a lot. You're going to have this position just because you're a man. And they get in their head and they have this power that they don't deserve.
So she was continuing to struggle. She was often going to the doctor. She still had that nervous stomach thing. Now she had a new one. She was scared of getting pregnant again.
That's a sign right there.
She'd had such bad postpartum depression.
Yeah.
And Andrea Yates was the same way.
Hello.
Anyways, she was spiraling, and then she was told that the school at the end of her year of teaching, they didn't want her to come back. They didn't feel like she was a good fit for the school. And so she bottomed out.
She should have gone to get a teacher position at like a boarding type school.
Yeah, that would have been good for her.
It would have, that kind of control or whatever she needed would have been appreciated.
So Alan knew his wife was struggling, but he didn't seem to know how to help her. He was off in Switzerland for 6 to 8 weeks at a time for his job.
Holy shit.
And so he had this great idea and he was like, you know what? I should get a babysitter for the baby and have her come join me in Switzerland for a week, which, yeah, you should. She went over to Switzerland and they had the best week probably ever together. Both of them would reminisce back on it and talk about it just being the happiest time within their marriage. They had a full week where they were just getting on the train and exploring different parts of the country. They said they had sex every single night, which they never did. Sex was non-existent for them. And it was like a honeymoon, a second honeymoon, probably better than their first honeymoon. But when the week was over and Betty returned home alone, he stayed there to keep working. And she fell right back into depression so badly, in fact, that she picked up the phone and called Alan's boss and said, you have to send my husband home. I can't do this by myself.
Oh, wow.
It was like the breaking point when Alan finally was like, okay, I need to find a job that does not involve travel, which she had already told him several times. Right. And so at that point, he transferred to a different department that would put him working exclusively in Dallas. And it was at this point that they moved to Wylie, Texas, which was a new suburb that had tract homes that they were building everywhere. They bought a nice little home. This is where the story is going to take place. Betty and Alan Gore would join a church where they would meet Candy and Pat Montgomery.
Okay.
So before I go into more of the story, I want to talk about Candy and Pat Montgomery because they're the other main couple.
This is going to be interesting to hear because I relate to Betty in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Some things now,
Right.
I've never gotten to that depressed state, I think, ever. In my life, thankfully. And then my sister's name is Candace and her nickname is Candy. So you're about to talk about her.
Yes. So Candace Wheeler was born on November 15th, 1949. So she was a Scorpio and only a few months older than Betty. Her dad was a radar technician in the Army. And so she was kind of an Army brat. They moved all the time.
That's a different kind of life.
So different. Her parents did what they could to maintain some form of normalcy for Candy and her older sister, Joy, which Joy is my mom's name. That's not a common name. The girls would attend 6 to 7 different schools before graduation.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
She lived in Fort Gordon in Georgia, Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio before they were whisked away to Italy for 3 years.
My God, my parents lived in Georgia, Texas, Italy.
Yeah, it was kind of part of it.
Well, he was in the Air Force, but
But Italy was a big base. I had an uncle stationed there.
Yeah.
Candy always recalled Italy to have some of her fondest memories, which of course is Italy.
Seriously.
Before graduation, she would end up living in El Paso, Germany, Washington, D.C., and Maryland too. This kind of lifestyle and changing friends every few years molded Candy into the type of person who could build rapport with anyone. That's
Makes
just part
sense.
of it.
Yeah, that's a great skill to have.
I grew up in a military town, so even though I didn't move around a lot, but I had to make new friends all the time because they were being shipped off.
Oh,
so
that's sad.
I feel like I have the same ability to just try and talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And Candy was that girl. She had a contentious relationship with her mom from a young age. She always felt like her mom was too strict and telling her that she wasn't old enough to do things yet. And she also had that older sister, Joy. And that's just part of the dynamic with...
It's true.
She wanted to do things that her sister was doing, but her sister was 5 years older. And
that's a hard... Yeah, that's quite the gap between them, to see your sister experiencing all these things and you're just this little bitty baby still.
And she idolized her sister.
Yeah.
And she always wanted to hang out with older kids most of the time.
I think that was part of my problem growing up too, because my sister is only 2 years older than me. Yeah. But we're close enough that I would see her doing things that I wasn't allowed to do. So like I was drawn to older people as a teenager.
I did it with my older brother who was 2 years older than me. Yeah. And I always like crushed on his friends and wanted to hang out with them.
I might have stayed a kid a little bit longer if I didn't have that to look up to.
Right.
Candace, you ruined me. I'm just kidding. I love you.
Her sister, taught her about how to put on makeup and even told her about what sex was.
Yeah.
And her mom overheard it one time and then bought her a book and was like making sure she knew what it was.
What it actually was.
Yeah. And Candy was a little freaked out, like a lot of kids were.
Yeah.
She was 13 and she read that and she was like, ugh. And her mom was like, do you have any questions? And she's like, yeah. What exactly is a penis? Like,
I know.
You're so innocent at that age.
You are, but not.
You hope you are.
Yeah, you hope they are.
Yeah.
There's so much out there nowadays that it's hard.
Candy liked attention from boys, but she wasn't really trying to like make out with them or anything like that. It was more just that innocent, oh, he likes me.
Cool.
He thinks I'm pretty.
And I grew up in the era where if they're really, really mean to you, you go home and you tell your family and they're like, that means he likes you.
That's like a very dangerous
I know.
thing. I've seen a lot about that too. So at the age of 14, Candy actually ran away from home, not really for any reason other than her best friend had a fight with her dad. And so the two of them met at the base teen club one night after a roller skating party.
Oh my gosh.
And decided to go off into the world together. They started walking only to be found the next day at a nearby shopping center.
Such a thing to do. I kind of did this too. I went to California at 14.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
I kind of relate to Candy because of the army brat lifestyle and like the way that she just ran around with some of her friends. And what I'm about to talk about now reminds me a lot of my childhood too.
Yeah.
She despised school. She found it to be so boring.
I mean, it is, but we can do it.
No subject ever just reeled her in. Mm-hmm. So by age 16, she was skipping school a lot to hang out at nearby fast food places. She started drinking beer and she was playing pool with older kids and boys.
All right. I was saying I related to Betty, but I'm relating a lot more to Candy right now.
This sounds like me. I didn't skip school. Well, I did. No, actually, I did skip school a lot. I almost didn't graduate. What am I talking about? I didn't start skipping school till I got a car at 16.
I started skipping, I think, freshman year. But the problem was I was so good at everything that the teacher knew this. And they're like, Jessica, what are you doing? And they would just hand me a stack of stuff and I would still end up graduating.
I was still top 10% of my class.
Exactly.
And I didn't even go to half my classes
like, you have to show up to
year.
your class at some point. I'm like, just give me the paperwork. I'll do it.
Now, I also grew up in a military town. So this is going to relate to me too. She would hang out on the base near the rifle range where there were lots of boys to give her attention.
Oh boy.
I didn't hang out at the rifle range, but we would go walk around the mall because all these young GIs would just give you so much attention when you're a 16-year-old girl. It grosses me out now, but when you're 16, you like that attention.
Get a little dressed up and just walk the mall.
She was always fighting with her mom about the clothes she wanted to wear.
Of course.
Makeup.
Yeah.
Her curfew. She also began smoking.
Sounds like a normal teenage girl to me.
And although both of her parents were smokers, they told Candy they didn't want her picking up this habit.
Nope. Only parents can do it. Kids cannot.
Yeah.
There's even some stuff to my daughter. Like every now and then I'll have a soda and I'm not a big soda person, but she'd be like, I want one. And I'm like, no, you can start having this stuff when you're 18.
Exactly.
I just don't want her addicted to sugar stuff. But.
And smoking is a hard one. I wouldn't want my kids to smoke.
Of course.
And
you don't want them to.
Even though the parents are smoking, it's because they're addicted and they know that
exactly.
they don't know want to be doing it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all right. We all try things out though.
Yes. So despite me telling you all of this, Candy was not what I would say was an out of control. She was just normal teenager.
Yes, that's what it sounds like. Experiencing the world.
In fact, by the time she was a junior in high school, the most scandalous thing she had done was go skinny dipping late at night. So she wasn't even hooking up with boys. She had seen her best friend get pregnant at 16 and have to drop out of school. So I think that made her very cautious of sex.
Yeah. That would make sense.
She did begin dating a senior named Chris, and she fell madly in love with him. As she would recall later, she said, "We had dated for a couple of months before I went to bed with him. Actually, went to car with him would be more appropriate since it was the backseat of his Ford."
All this car sex. It's exciting sometimes.
Well, that's not how she saw it. I was very disappointed.
Yeah.
From all the trashy novels I had read, I expected fireworks, explosions, to be all aquiver with lust.
It was just grunting and then like being very uncomfortable in the position she was in. She's like, this is not what I wanted.
She said, "It felt good and it didn't hurt like I thought it might, but it also didn't feel as good as I thought it was supposed to."
She's like, this was inconvenient.
It got better over time and we became more experienced and experimented, but I never felt guilty about it. It was just the natural course of things and we were in love.
Yeah.
They dated until Candy graduated from high school, and that Christmas, Chris wanted to give her an engagement ring, but her mother said, "No, you're too young. You can't do it." And while Candy was out visiting her newly married sister in California, Joy was out there. She was married and she had just had a miscarriage. Her dad got news that they were going to be moved from Maryland to a base in Illinois, and she decided that she wanted to move with her parents to Illinois instead of going back to Maryland and being with Chris. So I guess at the end of the day, she decided she was probably too young to get married too.
I mean, it kind of is.
She wasn't even graduated from high school.
We don't really know who we are.
So a few years later, Candy ended up in El Paso, Texas, working as a secretary at a furniture factory. She had been floundering for a little while, trying to decide what she wanted to do with her life and working various jobs. She did not go to college. She was now 20 years old, and it was the first time she had lived outside of her parents' house. She was renting a duplex with a friend and just doing whatever work she could to pay the bills. She, at this time, started to think about what's my next step in life. And she knew she had always wanted to have kids, but she didn't really want the husband part. She realized, if I want to have kids, I got to have a husband. And so she kind of felt like it was the thing she needed to do, was to get married. She's 20 years old. And I feel like around this time frame, you were an old maid if you hit like 24 without being married.
I know. But that's such a religious thing too. Even growing up, I thought, yeah, you get married around that time.
Now, Candy wasn't religious. Her family wasn't religious, so she didn't have any of that. But I think it was just the pressure because she's probably seeing all of her friends and everything.
Well, yeah, they're probably already have babies and stuff.
And she's just working as a secretary, barely making it. But while she was at the furniture factory, she made friends with two older ladies, Marie Montgomery and Trudy Temple. They were the mother and aunt of Pat Montgomery, a young single man who worked all the time. And his mother was fond of setting him up on blind dates with nice young girls that she would meet along the way.
Oh, great.
Pat was working in Dallas at Texas Instruments, which was a huge employer at the time.
I still remember it. That's
and they still are.
Calculators, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
He was a brilliant electrical engineer and he had a bright future ahead of him. He agreed to go on a date that his mother set up while he was visiting in El Paso, and that's how Candy and Pat would meet. It wasn't fireworks at all. In fact, neither really felt like the other was even their type.
Interesting.
Candy said Pat was not handsome, but she had been with worse.
You know, I hear that a lot. And then an entire relationship comes out of that. I'm like, how does that happen? Well, I'm not really attracted to him, but you know, there are some good things.
In fact, Candy described that date as the dullest of her life.
Wow.
She said she just listened to him drone on and on about engineering and she had no idea what he was talking about. Candy was petite and blonde. She was described as a little impish with a thin pointed nose and a contagious laugh.
Impish, huh?
Impish. She was also not Pat's typical type. And when he first met her, his thoughts were, typical mother's choice. Here's another fake date I have to endure.
Wow. What was his type?
I don't know. It never said, but not Candy.
Okay.
It's just funny because we know they're going to end up married and it's like neither one of them
liked
was
each other.
Interested. Despite all of this, at the end of that first date, Pat asked Candy out again immediately and she surprisingly said, okay. And they went out again.
This is the next course in my life, so I guess it'll be you.
They went out the next day. They drove out into the desert because they're in El Paso and they just ended up talking all day. Pat asked her to hang out the next day again.
What?
She actually tried to break up with him on the third day because he was going back to Dallas and she knew that this was not something she wanted long term. So I feel like she was just trying to be nice. But when she tried, he didn't take the hint.
Because she works with his mother. Like, it's probably a little bit different than just some random dude she meets. She's like, crap, I have to at least try.
Nice. And he was 5 years older than her. I don't know if I mentioned that yet.
Oh.
When he got back to Dallas, he sent her a dozen roses and a cute card. It said something about, hope you got the sand out of your pants, because they had been out in the desert and all of that. And something about that touched her. And she ended up calling him, even though she knew she wasn't interested. And she called him and just said, this was so sweet. And then they just started talking on the phone and writing letters to each other. So they had this whole long distance thing going on. And maybe just because they had nothing better to do, that built up this, it was like a slow burn. Maybe.
Right, exactly. They got to know each other better over time. Because it was this like really rushed, and forced hang out together, like each other.
And people can grow on you. I've had this happen before.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, it's not really my type. But then something they do, I'm just like, oh, I really like this person now.
My daughter's father, it took me 3 years to like him. It can happen.
It can.
It doesn't mean it's supposed to mean forever.
So after they were riding back and forth, Pat had to come to El Paso because his uncle unexpectedly passed away, and they were able to hang out again in person, and they had a great time. And Candy started telling all of her friends that she met the man she was going to marry. Just 1 year later, they were married, and Candy moved to Dallas. He went back to school at the University of Colorado for his PhD, and Candy was there by his side. They were struggling for money these first few years. He was a poor college student. She wasn't really making much money as a secretary, and they also found out that they were pregnant, and they welcomed their first daughter, Jenny, in 1972.
Wow.
Pat was brilliant, and his dissertation was considered groundbreaking at the time, even though probably only about 12 people in the world even understood what he was talking about with electromagnetics. But this meant he had a very lucrative career. And by 1973, he was offered a job working for Texas Instruments' top secret military radar projects, and they moved back to Dallas area with such a large salary being paid. They were able to purchase their first home in Richardson. So everything she wanted was coming true. In 1974, they welcomed their second child, Ian. Candy decided 2 was enough. That's all she wanted. She had a boy and a girl, and she had her tubes tied. And she told Pat, now that they had kids in a house, the next thing they should do is join a church.
Interesting.
This was odd considering Candy had always claimed to be agnostic.
Yeah.
And Pat was not religious, but for whatever reason, and I've seen this happen with other people I know, they just felt compelled that they should go to church now that they have children.
Interesting.
So 3 years later, the Montgomerys would upgrade to their dream home in the country in a very ritzy subdivision in a little suburb called Lucas. And this is where they would discover the little country church, Methodist Church of Lucas.
So they don't live where Betty ended up.
No, Betty's in Wylie. These are all very small little bedroom communities of Dallas, and they're all like 15, 20 minutes from each other. So the Methodist Church of Lucas, I'm going to say this is the butterfly effect moment, because choosing this church and it becoming Candy's whole world, which we're about to find out, is the beginning of the whole incident. This is where Candy would meet and befriend Alan and Betty Gore.
Okay.
The Methodist Church of Lucas was a very liberal version of the church. They even had a female preacher. Her name was Jackie Ponder. And she was African-American. Like, wow. Very progressive, considering Texas is not progressive, especially, I don't know.
They're taking a step back every day lately.
Yes. Watching both of the series that were done, one of them had a black actress and the other one had a white woman. And I was wondering when watching it, I'm like, which one's the true story? So what it did is it attracted all the young families that weren't really into church.
Interesting. It became a cult, damn it.
Kind of. Jackie was all about females being outspoken in the church. And this was a church that actually was more female led.
Interesting. Okay.
Candy loved it there, and she formed a very close relationship with Jackie, and she even became a top officer within the church. She would plan events, she would do community outreach, she would teach Bible school, you name it, she was doing it. Now, there was another local Methodist church called Briarwood, and they had some kind of falling out. I grew up in small churches. They can be like some of the most high school, like I remember our church falling apart because they didn't like the preacher bought a brand new car, and everybody's like, oh, you shouldn't buy a new car, and then they would go to another church. So some kind of shit like that was going on. And that brought 5 new families to the Lucas Methodist in August of 1977. And that's when Alan and Betty Gore, they ended up coming to the Lucas church because of whatever happened drama-wise at Briarwood. Their daughter, Alyssa, was similar in age to Jenny Montgomery, so naturally those girls became fast friends. And then Candy and Betty, arranging play dates and whatever, and working together on Sunday school, just became friends as well that way.
Okay.
And then Pat and Alan also became friends because they both sang in the choir together.
Oh, okay.
So they were couples friends.
Right.
Once again, this brings me back because my parents had couples friends that I would then be friends with their kids.
Right.
And it's just...
I mean, I grew up that way too. It's almost forced upon you that those have to be your friends, you know, within the church.
The church becomes your whole world. And that's what's going to happen to the Gores and the Montgomerys. Like everything was centered around the church.
Right.
They formed a couples volleyball team and they would compete with other churches in the area. And
we played volleyball at my church too.
It seemed like a happy time for everyone. They're all in their late 20s at this point. They're all like 26 to 28 and just, you know, raising kids, going to church, living the country Texas life. And the men were making the money and the women were staying home, raising the kids and doing stuff at the church. But all of this would change in 1978. So Jackie, who was the pastor that everybody was looking up to, started confiding in some of the women that she was friends with that she was going to have a divorce. Her husband had left her.
Oh.
He couldn't handle having a woman that was a pastor. It overshadowed him and he didn't like it. And he just moved out one day and she started telling them, you know, I'm a pastor. I'm getting divorced. I don't know what this means.
Right.
The church was all supportive. They all loved Jackie. She was the reason they were there. But here's what else happened is that she began dating other men. And those in the church of a more conservative persuasion, they didn't like it. So there was talk about, oh, maybe Jackie needs to move on. She's not, you know, a good spiritual leader.
Well, it sounds like he left her and she's just not supposed to
ever
date ever again. Okay.
So Jackie decided it was time for her to move on to a different church. And that just kind of sent all the women of the church into a tailspin because they're like, what does this mean?
Right.
You know, if we lose this woman who's like made this church what it is. And I read that it kind of sent all of the women at the church went into a depression that summer when Jackie left.
Wow. Makes sense. Especially if it's your entire life. I'm sure they were very worried that a man's going to now be the pastor and it's just going to change the dynamic for everything.
Yeah, unfortunately. Betty Gore also had been struggling. So she had one child. They didn't have another. She had this fear of pregnancy, but she wanted more children in the house. So she had joined a fostering.
Oh.
What is that called? I don't know. A program, I guess.
She became a foster parent?
Yeah. And she had been fostering different children off and on, you know, keeping them for months at a time. But she had just had an 8-year-old boy who was super difficult. He had come from really bad background and he was just testing her limits in every way. And she actually had to ask the state to remove him from her home. And she felt immense guilt over it.
It shows you who she is, though, to do that. And it not, the whole fostering situation is so difficult because you hear horror stories.
Right.
But there are people who do it from the goodness of their heart. Like it's not about the money. They actually do want the children in the home.
Yeah. And I think that was Betty. She was sitting at home. She was doing church work. She had Alyssa, but she wanted to do good things in the world. And she had been fostering children successfully. She also was not teaching at the time. So I think it was like filling her cup with having other children to raise up or whatever. But this really sent her into a deep depression.
Right. I mean, because it's an entire child. I would totally understand the guilt there because you're feeling like you're failing that kid.
Yes.
But at the same time, you're trying not to die in the midst of it. So it was good of her to recognize her limits and say, hey, this isn't working out. But at the same time, it's a whole child and you don't get to just throw children away.
And he'd already been thrown away, I'm sure, many times. Like, how do you reconcile that?
You're just another stop in his path and it wasn't a positive one. And that's hard to deal with. Poor kid.
I know. We have Betty falling into depression and Alan, I feel like, is kind of oblivious from everything I see. He's not supporting her and he is now taken on. And I think this happens in a lot of relationships where he's just like, that's just who she is. And he's not even trying anymore in a way. He's just like, oh, she's just moody.
Yep. That's how we're always described. Well, she's just moody. But why is she moody?
Right. And have you talked through, I don't think he was like sitting around and having deep conversations with his wife in any way. And I don't know that she had a lot of outlets. She was good friends with Candy and she had the other women from church and they would all sit around and have coffee together and talk. For Betty, she was more of the reserved one and she came off as kind of standoffish. So while there was this large group of women, she probably wasn't the favorite among many of them.
It's because she's observing and she's listening and she has so much in her own life that this is a very Capricorn thing to do.
I think so.
They can come off very quiet, almost like judgy, but the reality of it is very selective in what you're saying. And I would say as a Capricorn, I don't particularly like participating in gossip. And stuff like that. And this is what this is. It's like this little female club about gossip of their own husbands and their own lives. And she's like, well, I don't really want to talk about mine. Like, I already deal with enough.
And I don't think she did share much about what was going on.
Yeah.
If she did, it was mostly with Candy, one-on-one. Candy was the opposite. She was the person everybody wanted to be friends with. She was top in the church. She was like, very personable. She had learned that from an early age.
Right.
She could build a connection with anyone.
She loved the attention too, it sounds like.
She did, for sure. She was always like the one rallying people to do things. That summer, she plunged into depression.
Oh.
And she said it was because Jackie was leaving.
Right.
That was one of her closest friends. And she was actually talking with Jackie right before she left. And she said, I don't think it's just that you're leaving. She's like, I saw something in you after your divorce that made me realize I'm not happy in my marriage.
Yeah.
And she saw Jackie out there dating other men and like basically getting a new zest on life.
Right.
Or a new perspective or whatever. And she's at home realizing that she has everything she wants. She has a huge house. She has the kids. And she still feels like she's missing out on something in life.
Yeah.
She even told Jackie that she felt like she had made some kind of wrong decision, but she didn't know what to do. And she told Jackie, her pastor, that she was thinking that she just needed to have an affair.
Wow.
And Jackie told her, I wouldn't recommend. And she actually told her to go talk to another woman in the church that had an affair and all the fallout of it. And she said, just really think about it. But Jackie also said she knew when Candy made up her mind, Candy was going to do it.
Okay.
So Candy decided she needed something to reinvigorate her life.
She needed a spark, something to feel excited about.
Yeah. She's 28 years old and she's like, I'm too young to feel this old or whatever. I don't know what the saying is. She said, I've done all the things a wife is supposed to do, the house, the kids, the fancy meals. And then one day I wake up and I say, where's the payback?
Where's the gardener? Where's the pool boy?
She said, I just want sex without any emotional commitment. She's like, I don't want to ruin what I have. I don't want to ruin my marriage or my home life. I just want things like what I read in the trashy romance novels.
Then you don't do that with your friend's husband. You go find something else. I'm sorry. That was a bad decision there.
Right. So here is where things start heading in a direction. Candy decided to join the church volleyball team, which was supposed to be a couples team, but Pat didn't want to play that fall. And Alan Gore, Betty was in her deep depression because of what was going on. So the two of them joined the volleyball team without their partners.
Oh boy.
So they're at practice every night.
And she's jumping up and down and those boobies are in his face.
And their husband and their wife, their respective, spouses are not there.
And he's wearing those short shorts
tight
and
shorts showing his
junk
package
is going blah, 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 blah. They accidentally bump into each other. Whoops. Let me show you how to serve.
I am not going to go into a ton of detail because this is like chapters and chapters in the book. And what most of the miniseries focuses on is Candy and Alan's relationship. Yes, it's good to watch, but I'm not going to go into
doesn't really matter.
Much.
It's not like they were like, we're in love. It's an affair.
Right. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about it. And then we're going to go into, is this what really led to Candy murdering Betty with an axe?
I mean,
how do we get there? Do you even realize how we're going to get there yet? So Candy Montgomery says she always remembers the precise moment that she decided she wanted to go to bed with Alan. It happened on the church volleyball court.
What? They did it in the church?
No, that's when she knew she wanted to fuck him.
Wait, I was like, that's a whole other level there.
So Candy and Alan were both trying to make a play at the same time and they collided.
I told you.
It was a harmless bump and it went unnoticed by everyone else. But for Candy, it brought about something. She thought at that moment, Alan Gore smells sexy.
If she could have had a boner, it would have shown.
She had a lady boner for Alan Gore. She was telling her best friend, Sherry Kleckler, about it later. She told Sherry she wanted to have this sexual escapade and that she was looking for someone to shake up her very boring sex life. She was very explicit with her friend about what she was looking for. She wanted transcendent sex. And then when she felt herself attracted to Alan Gore, she was like, this guy has a receding hairline. He has a beer belly.
Just put a beanie on.
And he dresses like a dad.
A beer belly.
She's like, how am I attracted to him?
Fucking what is it with Alan Gore?
Something about his smell, apparently.
Well, at least he smells good, because not all guys smell good.
But all of a sudden, every time she was around him at church, she found herself flirting with him, and he was seeming to give her attention back, and like this whole like dynamic just started happening.
Weird.
Well, this happened at the same time that Alan Gore was struggling in his own marriage. He was finding that he and Betty were in a rut when it came to their sex life. It was very routine. With her depression and everything going on lately, they were barely ever sleeping together anymore.
Yeah, because women don't want to sleep with men when they're depressed and not getting back.
They're not getting support.
Yeah, because sex is not just sex.
No, it's an intimate connection.
Right. And it sounds like Candy, she had everything she wanted.
Mm-hmm.
She just wanted it to be more fun. So she was not in the same place that Betty was.
She wasn't looking for an emotional connection at all.
Removed.
Betty was emotionally struggling and had a husband that was like, why is she not having sex with me? I don't understand.
And it sounds like for years, she just needed him to be home.
Mm-hmm.
But he was already gone.
Yeah.
They were already two different people.
And now he's going to go have an affair, which is just not going to make things any better, right?
And I saw him. He's not
attractive.
Even
Candy said that. She's like, why the fuck am I attracted to this guy? Because Candy was a decent looking girl.
Yeah.
And so she approached him one night after volleyball. She hopped in the truck with him and she said, I've been thinking about something. And she was very forward. And she's like, I think we should go to bed together. That's how she said it. And he was like, what?
He's like, whoa. Yeah. What? Right now?
And he was like, but we're married. It is so weird and awkward because he's an engineer and she's very forward and just a normal, cute 28-year-old. And she's just like, yeah, I just want to have sex. I don't want to hurt Pat. I don't want to hurt Betty. I think something about you is attractive and let me know if you're interested.
Yeah, it's just a transaction. You bring your dick, I'll bring my vagina.
Exactly what she said.
That's all we'll do.
And he talked about it, and he actually, on her 29th birthday, so it was in November, so she brought this up to him in, I think it was like September timeframe, and it took him 2 months to come around and be like, she actually called him at some point, and she's like, are we going to do this or what? She's like, the longer you wait, the
I'm
more
going to choose someone else.
She said, the more disappointed I'm going to be in how you actually perform in bed, because I'm building this up too much.
I know.
And so they were just having this like whole flirtation. And finally on her birthday, it was November 16th, he called her and he said, come meet me in McKinney, Texas. I'm at an auto repair shop. And they sat down to lunch and they mapped out what their affair was going to look like.
Whoa,
so
this is so weird.
It's bizarre. It's not steamy and hot in any way. They literally write out rules about how the affair is going to happen.
Wow.
And it's going to happen on his lunch breaks because he worked a job in Dallas and he could easily sneak away for 2 hours at a time. And there was plenty of seedy motels that they could rent for like a couple of hours for $25. Candy would drop the kids off and she would come meet him. And she said, to save time, I'll cook lunch.
Whoa.
So she would bring a full picnic meal and they would have lunch and then they would do the dirty.
Well, I think it's interesting how they're committing to it being an affair and not just a one-time thing. What if it goes absolutely horrible the first time?
And it could have,
but it didn't.
Actually, we'll talk about it here in a minute. They also said if either one of them started developing feelings beyond just sex, they would end the affair.
You can't even say that really, because if one starts to develop feelings, they're not going to tell the other one because they'd already decided that it would end the affair. So the other person's not going to say, yo, I'm liking you, so we have to stop this. That's not how it works.
So we're going to see it get messy.
Okay.
As all affairs do.
I know. That's true.
So they would meet at this place called the Como Motel. It was a place where men would go to meet working girls.
Men would go to come.
Yes.
Oh.
It was very awkward at first, and Candy realized that Alan was not a great lover. In fact, she found out the first time they met up, he had never even French kissed a woman. So I don't know what him and Betty were doing, but she kissed him with tongue and he didn't know what to think of it.
Oh.
So you can imagine how good of a lover Alan Gore was.
But hey, fresh slate. You can teach him, right?
Exactly. She was like, I can teach him.
Yeah.
I will teach him to be a good lover. And she saw it as a challenge, but she was not experiencing the fireworks that she was hoping for.
Yeah, they did wait too long. They could have just done some quickie thing and she would have moved on. And there you go. It would have been done.
But what they did start having is it became like this fun routine. And I think this happens with a lot of affairs where it's just something exciting to look forward to.
Because it's a secret.
It's not even that. what I read was that Alan viewed it as a time
to have good food because she made lunches.
Well, that he enjoyed the food for sure, but he also had 2 hours where he didn't have to think about anything.
Yeah.
He says it was his relaxation. He didn't have to deal with the fact that Betty, his wife, was absolutely depressed and he couldn't help her, or he wasn't even fucking trying. He didn't have to worry about work. He didn't have to think about anything except just being with Candy.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it was kind of the same thing for her. It was an escape for both of them.
Yep.
So even though it eventually, because this lasted for many, many months, almost a year, it became less about sex. She said sometimes they didn't even have sex. It was really just about companionship, and they became really good friends. And they would lay there and talk about things with each other that they never talked about with their spouses.
I see that. Yeah.
And this is where I've always said the emotional aspect of an affair is harder to come back from than a physical. Like somebody just
huge,
fucking someone else.
Way different.
But when they're sharing deep, dark secrets that they haven't shared with you, or they're talking about your relationship with someone else, that is such a betrayal. Candy kind of gave Alan that unconditional
attention
love and attention.
Yeah.
And also, he had never been with any other woman except Betty. And for him, the sex was probably great.
Right.
Because of that.
Yeah.
Candy was the one saying she didn't feel fireworks, but I'm guessing Alan enjoyed it. It also didn't help that Betty was continuing to spiral at home.
Yeah.
And she also found out that she was pregnant with their second child.
Oh, no.
And he knew what that meant. He knew that she was going to go into postpartum.
Yeah.
And so he clung to Candy even more.
And sex is never going to be fireworks if you actually don't have love involved. Sorry.
Yeah, you're right. It has to have that love. Otherwise, it's just a physical.
It's just physical. There's not a connection. The connection part is what makes it like that.
Yes. Now, here's what happened is Candy started realizing that the sex wasn't that great, and she started feeling a little bit guilty about it. It wasn't even about Pat at this point, but she was, leaving her kids for 2 hours to go hang out with this guy to have kind of so sex.
And be his therapist in a way.
Yes. And she was making him amazing food. Like I was reading some of the meals she was making to take to their hotel, and I was like, I want to have an affair with Candy. The food. She was making all these special recipes and desserts and started becoming almost like another job for her.
Yeah.
And she was kind of losing interest. In a way, it sounded like she felt guilty to break up with Alan. But she did approach him about 6 months in, and she says, I think I'm starting to develop feelings for you and we should probably cut it off. Now, was she really developing feelings for him, or was she just like, this has lived its course? I don't know for sure.
Well, that was the only real thing they discussed that would end it.
Yes. I bring this up because everyone's going to say that Candy was obsessed with Alan and maybe that's why she killed Betty, but I didn't see a lot of that. I actually see Candy being like, well, I did that. I'm ready to move on. I don't think she was in love with Alan.
Right.
But it's also complicated because they shared a lot of really deep connection.
But it's more of like this strange best friend situation.
Right.
Not that kind of love.
Right. But when she approached Alan, he said because Betty was pregnant and was spiraling, he didn't want it to end. And he convinced her, he's like, it's just sex for me. There's no feelings. I'll do things differently. And somehow he convinced her to keep up with it. And they kept meeting.
Yeah. How do you make meal after meal and then you have to go home and make more meals? A lot of cooking.
Yeah. She described it as becoming more of a hassle than anything.
Yeah.
And she said she missed the magic of the first few times they got together. It was exciting then, even if it wasn't fireworks. It was just something thrilling. And now, like I said, it was just another thing she had to do.
That's rough. Yeah.
She also started to feel guilty because she was friends with Betty and their kids were hanging out and she knew Betty was pregnant again.
Yeah.
There was a lot of complicated stuff going on. And she actually brought it up that she was throwing a baby shower for Betty with the women at church. And she just had this immense feeling of guilt while doing that because she was fucking her husband on the side.
It's one thing to be fucking someone's husband. It's an entirely other thing to be friends with them.
Yes.
Doing things with them and for them and seeing them all the time.
And they even went out as couples. They would go out and have Chinese food together.
I bet you this is so common though. I bet you most affairs are this way.
I've heard
couples
of this,
and then, switching over to, I bet you that's the most common thing.
I've heard of this exact situation happening in the church I grew up in with two couples that were best friends and then one of the partners, of each couple.
I mean, it makes sense. They're the ones you're around mostly. And so you're going to build that attraction or whatever. And then it's this weird, stupid loyalty thing. That's why she can't leave.
Right.
It's this loyalty because she is still friends with Betty. They're very involved in the church and doing activities.
Yes.
So she can't just be like, see ya. She's going to see him.
This is her whole world, is
That's
this
crazy.
church.
That Candy, bad decision.
Horrible decision.
Just because you bump into a dude during volleyball and he smells good, that's not a good reason to have an affair. I'm sorry, Candy.
She needed to go to a bar.
Exactly.
And just have a one-night stand.
Go to a bar, get it out of your system.
So she made a horrible decision in getting involved with Alan. Yeah. And then I do think that they got too deep because they made this intimate friendship connection.
Right.
And then they didn't want to stop it because it was filling a hole that each of them had in their marriage. Yeah. And instead of being able to correct that within their marriage, they found it in each other.
And that is rough because when you're in that state where you are both doing this, everyone thinks everything's great or whatever, you have nothing to lose. So you're going to, in a way, let me explain this better. You have nothing to lose in what you're saying to that person. So in a way, they knew each other better than anyone in the world.
Yes.
That's a scary place to be.
Right.
Especially if they're not your actual partner.
They felt more freedom with that, like you said, with that person.
They could say whatever the fuck they wanted.
Because there's nothing on the line.
Nothing. Yeah, exactly. So, you could literally say, hey, I want to go murder someone tomorrow. And they'd be like, that's an interesting thought. Thanks for telling me.
Right. And they were, at some point, I read, about 6 to 9 months into their relationship, they were not even having sex. They weren't even meeting at the hotel sometimes. They were meeting in a park just to lay down in the grass and talk.
They almost became business partners.
Yeah, they became besties.
Weird.
And so it's this very fucked up dynamic.
It is. It's a dangerous one.
And I understand why affairs cause as much damage as they do when I read the story.
It's difficult. You understand why they happen and then the damage that they cause.
Betty had their second child, Bethany. Alan said this kind of, for a while, made their marriage good again. Because I think this happens with a lot of marriages that are struggling. You have a baby, it brings you together again.
Right. It's a baby that needs you.
And during that time, he kind of started blowing Candy off. And she didn't like it because while she had at one point been ready to leave, when he said no, she went back into this affair relationship. And now I think she was having some feelings, not necessarily like, I love you, I want to be married to you, you're my man, but more just like, I need that companionship.
Yeah.
And so she missed it.
And I bet you she was starting to feel more like, well, you're supposed to want to be with me more. You begged
some
me to
entitlement,
stay.
something like that.
Right.
Yes. Well, it all comes to a head, and he was still meeting up with Candy some, just not as much, but he had been with Candy all day. And they had been having sex this day. And he came home and they had dinner or whatever. The baby was 3 months old. And Betty that night decided she wanted to try and have sex with her husband. This was really hard because Alan wanted to have sex with her, but he couldn't because he had been spent.
Mm-hmm.
Betty had never been an aggressor in the bedroom.
Right.
It was always him. So she felt like she was really putting herself out there. This was the first time she had come to him and said, I want to make love. And she had a, nice little nightgown that she just bought, and he rejected her.
That's rough.
And she began to cry. And she said, it's because I'm ugly. I've gained so much weight from the baby. Ugh. It sucks. I read this and I'm like, I can so feel for this woman and how she would feel.
Mm-hmm.
And Alan felt horrible too. Betty went to bed that night and she's like, you don't love me anymore. What's wrong? Something has changed. Although they weren't having sex as often,
he would never turn it down, I'm sure. Right.
And then she internalized it and it was like, it must be something wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so Alan realized at that point he was really hurting his wife by having this affair. And that's when he went to Candy and he said, I can't do this anymore. I'm hurting my marriage now. Betty is more important to me than this affair.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Candy didn't really care about the sex or anything like that, like I said, but she realized that she had become too dependent on Alan's kindness and the conversations, the things that she was getting out of that relationship that she wasn't with Pat. And she kind of had a reaction when he said we needed to break up. And she said, when I came to you and said we needed to break up, you told me no. So I'm going to do the same thing to you. No, you're not going to leave me. So there was something going on there.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was love. It wasn't lust at this point. It was really just feeling.
It was almost like this blood pact situation.
Right. But they did break up the affair. So at this point, it is now October of 1979 and the affair ended. Alan and Betty entered this, it's called the marriage encounter. It's something that was done through the Methodist church where you went off on a weekend and reinvigorated your marriage.
Okay.
Seemed to like really help. They came back and things were better than they'd ever been. Betty was really vulnerable with Alan during that time. Like it's one of those places where you like write down things that you want your partner to know. And there's a whole thing if you watch the miniseries about it. And it made me feel really, really sad for Betty with some of the letters that she wrote him, just saying, I was going to read one of them because I think it just tells you how Betty felt about Alan. So on October 28th of 1979, she wrote this. It says, Dear Alan, sometimes I have doubts about my worth as a person and wonder if I'm really accomplishing anything and am doing what God would want me to do. But if you express your pride in me, I feel reassured that I am really important. I need to be reassured and told this often, just as I need to see and feel tangible evidence of your love. I love you, ! Love, Betty.
Whoa. Yeah, that says everything right there.
She's not getting what she needs.
No, she's not.
And she's begging for it from him.
And it's affecting her. She's feeling like she's not even a human being right now.
Yeah, I don't know. And there's several. That was just the one. They actually used this one in the foreword of the book that I read. But there were several other ones. There was a lot. They talked about their sex life. She told him that she had been taught one thing about sex and she didn't know how to talk about it, but she wanted to like work on it. Like I feel like Betty was doing everything. She was reaching out and saying, this is what I need. And I don't feel like Alan was meeting her.
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't love her.
It's possible.
He was in love with Candy at that point. I don't know.
It's difficult to say where love is in general with either relationship, it sounds like. But more of this is what you're supposed to do. And it's convenient, honestly, for the men.
Yes.
To have these home lives. It's just this thing ingrained in men to have this nuclear family.
Yeah.
I have a wife at home. I have children and our house runs a certain way every single day. I feel like instinctively women know that's not exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And there's this rift since the dawn of time. Actually, no, like I'm unfulfilled because this isn't my only purpose in life.
Right. We're not just here to be caretakers. We have just as many ambitions and goals in life as men do.
Exactly.
And I also read something that said that men who have wives and children are respected more and get higher promotions and everything within work. Whereas women, when they're married and have kids, it actually hurts them in the workforce.
I can't tell you how many times I've had to deal with this.
I've dealt with it as a working mom forever.
That I have a child immediately looked down upon.
Yep. You can't be as dedicated to the job.
And like she gets sick. I have to go pick her up. Oh, I guess, that's okay. You have to do what you have to do. I'm like, but here's the point. Guess who doesn't go pick her up?
The men.
Her dad, right? It's like there are things that automatically fall on you as a mother to be expected. Like it's never turned in the other direction. Now, there are men who are very good dads.
Of course.
I'm not saying that. There is this ingrained expectation of roles, and especially in religious families.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's the issue here because it sounds like they both kind of
they're not even that religious, really.
Right. Yeah. But within religion, it ingrains this in the men that, this is what they're supposed to have.
It's what God said.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it just turns into that. A lot of relationships like this, it doesn't involve love. And sometimes if the marriage lasts, love maybe comes even 40 years down the line because they're forced to spend time with each other.
Yeah.
I don't know. Man, I think we could talk about this forever.
I told you this would be a hot button one.
Yikesies.
The affair ended October 1979. So we're still a ways away from when Betty is going to be murdered.
And when was that again?
She's going to be murdered 8 months later.
Okay.
So after the affair ended, Candy went to her friend Sherry and she was upset about breaking up with Alan. And she told her friend Sherry, let's go out to the singles club. And so they would start leaving their men behind and they would sneak out on nights when they were just going to go have dinner, and they would go over to this place called the Currency Club. Candy would go out. She would get all dressed up, dolled up, and she'd go dance with random men. So she was filling her need for attention or extramarital kind of an affair, I guess, in a way, just going out and getting men to buy drinks and dance with her and flirt with them.
To be oogled over.
I think so. But while she was out there, she actually met a man named Richard, and he was very forward. He was very opposite of Alan. He's like, you're pretty, let me have your number. He went and got the hotel, and they had an affair that lasted about a month and a half.
She should have done that to begin with.
That's what I think too.
She apparently needs to do this.
Yes.
So she should have done that to begin with.
She needs excitement in her life. This is the excitement that she could have had.
She might have not had the guts to go do it that way, though, unless she didn't start the way she did with Alan.
I think so. And she was actually the one that broke off the affair with Richard. She had her fun and she was done. She didn't really want to get emotionally connected to someone else. So I think she kind of learned her lesson from the Alan affair. And she's like, you know what? I just want to have no strings attached sex. And that's what she had with Richard.
Is this an episode on how to have an affair?
Maybe.
It's kind of sounded like it.
Candy started questioning herself and she was like, why am I continuing to do this? It's not giving me what I thought it would. And she decided she needed to focus on her marriage again. And she had seen Alan and Betty go through that marriage encounter, Christian getaway retreat. And she's like, maybe that will help me and Pat. So I think she was recommitting herself to like try and fit back into the marriage mold. And so they went off to the encounter weekend as well. They didn't come back as enthralled with each other as Betty and Alan did.
They also didn't have a brand new baby to connect over.
That's true. They had 2 older children and they were just stuck in it, and Pat worked a lot, but he made really good money. So she couldn't complain. She had the house of her dreams, all of that. She was recommitted to the church at this time, and she went away on a retreat in the spring of 1980. And while she was gone, Pat decided he was going to do something special for Candy. He had learned at the marriage encounter to try and do things. He went into like her box where she keeps like all her letters and things. He was looking for the old love letters that he had written her back when they were dating.
Oh no.
But what he found was the letter that Alan had actually written to end their affair.
Oh my goodness.
When they decided to end their affair, they had each exchanged like little cards just saying, you know, thank you for this experience. I love you as a person. It was nothing like really gushy, but
right.
He discovered his wife had an affair with Alan Gore.
Ruh-roh.
And she's not there. And so he actually called her friend Sherry Kleckler and said, I found this and I don't know what to do.
Poor Sherry. She's like, gosh darn it. Will you guys stop coming to me with things?
She's like, I'm just trying to live my life. I think Pat was very awkward, and he was, you know, super brilliant electrical engineer. Everything I see about him, he loved Candy to death, but he wasn't very good at outwardly.
He just wasn't good at showing it.
And he wasn't an exciting guy.
He seems like one of those guys who, if you ask him, maybe he'll just do it. Like, but he has to be told. Once he knows the order of things, then he follows that because his brain is math or whatever.
Everything I saw about Pat too, he was an amazing father. Like his kids loved him. Yeah. He did things with the kids all the time. Like they were going on family trips. They were going to the movies. They were having like, you know, taco nights. They were doing a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Good things. Like they looked like the perfect little family. So I do feel for him.
I never trust families that look perfect. Doesn't work that way.
But this had to be crushing for him because he had no idea. Oh, yeah, he never suspected.
Sure. Yeah.
And honestly, I don't think Betty had ever suspected Alan was cheating on her either. I don't think either one of the spouses knew.
No, because Betty sadly was self-sabotaging for a long time.
She was already so insecure about everything.
And with Candy being so involved in the church and getting him involved in the church, like Pat probably felt completely secure in everything.
Yeah.
Never ever thinking that that's what she was doing.
No, not at all.
Because she probably seemed very happy. And then adding this little affair in, he wouldn't have noticed because that was just her personality. She was just this happy, I'm doing all this stuff person.
And she was a very good liar. This is something that comes up in a lot of the Reddits and everything like that. It's like Candy was able to carry on this affair and she was able to lie to her husband. She was able to lie to Betty. And I guess Alan was too. So you can't say true. Candy was the only good liar here. Alan was figuring it out too. I'm only saying that because people are going to say things about Candy later with the whole ability to make things up.
Lying's easy.
It is, unfortunately.
I mean, it is.
We learn it as a young child. I saw it with both of my kids. They lie so they don't get in trouble.
Yep.
We know how to do it from a very young age, and everyone is capable
Everybody
of it.
lies.
Yes.
If you do have this moral compass about things with the people that are important to you, you don't lie.
True.
And this is where trust comes in.
And that's
everybody can lie, but
to lie to the person who's supposed to be, you know, the closest partner in your life.
Right.
Yeah, that takes a different kind of level.
And it's all about personality too.
Yes.
She obviously didn't feel wrong in what she did. She wasn't about to go tell Pat and be like, hey, I had this affair. It didn't feel wrong to her.
No.
Well, except at that one point. it felt wrong.
She had one time where she felt.
Then he made her stay. If she had stopped then, it probably would have never happened.
Nothing would have
again.
happened. Mm-hmm.
But because he pushed her to keep going, something changed in her that made her not have that guilt at all. And it all felt okay to her.
And remember, she told him that she was developing feelings at the time. Maybe she really was. Mm-hmm. And she wanted out before it got deeper. And then when he convinced her to stay, she did get emotionally connected to him.
She had to switch off something in her brain.
Yeah.
And that's what she switched it off and she became what she was in the end.
So anyways, Pat finds out she's having the affair and she comes back from the retreat and he gives her flowers.
Oh,
and he says, this is all my fault. I have been a absent husband.
Yeah.
I've been working too much. I'm so sorry that you felt like you needed to do this.
What an understanding dude.
Right.
That's crazy.
Pat seems like a very, very good man.
Wow.
And she, of course, confesses and says, I'm so sorry. Like, this is why I thought this would, bring excitement into my life. It didn't. I don't love him. I don't care for him. We're not doing it anymore. It is done. Mm-hmm. Pat and Candy at that time kind of reconnect in a good way. And they take a second honeymoon type of a trip to South Padre and decide that they're recommitting to each other and focusing on their family. And she did not tell him about the second affair with Richard.
Of course she didn't.
I don't know that she needed to at that point. It would have just been adding insult to injury.
It makes sense that his reaction would be that because he does seem like a really good guy, but she did attempt to fix things a little bit earlier by doing that church reconnection thing.
Right.
So that added to what she said. It's over and, I needed this. Because then they went and did that. He didn't know what it was for. He didn't know that involved this affair on the side.
Right. To me, this is just also telling of these kinds of secrets, affairs. They always have a way of coming out.
Yeah. I still don't see how Candy ends up murdering Betty with 41 axe.
I don't think anyone does. That's why I'm about to get into, actually.
I mean, was she drugged?
No.
LSD? Betty looked like a spider or something.
So we're in spring now. We're in April of 1980. So we're 3 months away from when Betty Gore would be murdered and everything seems to be going fine.
Yeah, they're back reconnected with their partners.
Nobody's having any affairs at this point. Alan is working his job. Betty's at home with the 2 kids. She, I think even at this point, is teaching again, if I remember right. I don't have it written down, but I believe she's back in the classroom. So seems like everything's going well. Candy and Pat have reconnected. Candy's still involved in the church. The kids are doing fine. And this is all leading up to June of 1980. And there was a vacation Bible school going on. And that day, June 13th, Alyssa had spent the night with the Montgomerys because Alyssa and Jenny were besties. She spent the night and Candy was just going to take them to Bible school. It was the last day of vacation Bible school, which is a big deal. That's when they have this big puppet show and the kids get to do their little skits or whatever that they learned. And all the parents come and watch. Yeah. The Empire Strikes Back, which is I think the second or third Star Wars movie.
I should know this. And there's someone that's going to be really mad that I don't know this, but I don't know this.
It was out in the theaters and the kids wanted to go see it. Betty was very strict on what her kids could and could not watch.
Unlike most parents back then.
Right.
The things we have seen.
And Candy knew that Alyssa really wanted to see the movie and that she made a comment to Pat. She was like, it's not fair for Alyssa to not be able to see the movie when all of her friends are. So she's like, I'm just going to ask Betty if Alyssa can stay another night and we'll all go to the movies together after Bible school.
This cannot be over a movie.
No, I hope not.
Oh my gosh.
So now I'm just going to relay what happens and then we'll discuss.
Yikes.
That morning on June 13th, Alan Gore was to leave for Minnesota for a business trip. It was only going to be one night. He hadn't been traveling very much, but this was something he couldn't get out of. Betty was struggling with it. She didn't want to be left alone even one night. And she was like, I don't understand why you have to go. She was in a mood that morning. When he was leaving, he said they didn't even really talk to each other because she was just upset that he was leaving.
It really makes me wonder what kind of trauma she went through to be so scared to be alone. Because that's what it seems like. She can't be alone. Maybe there's something we don't know from her past.
From her childhood.
Maybe, complete assumption here, maybe she was assaulted at some point at
Maybe.
night.
And she's uncomfortable with sex.
And she doesn't want to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know.
We don't know, but I know that's how it started that day. And he was like, it's going to be fine. I'm going to call you as soon as I get to the airport. I'll call you when I get to the hotel. They set up every thing that he was going to do. It was the first time she was going to be left alone after having Bethany. So Bethany, I believe, was almost a year old.
Wow.
So they kissed goodbye. He left. And she went about her day taking care of the kids. Or she only had Bethany at home because Alyssa was with Candy at Bible school. So she was just home doing housework, whatever. At 10 a.m., she gets a knock on the door. It's Candy. And Candy came over unannounced. That's something that Betty doesn't really like. Betty wants to know when people are coming over, which I'm with you, Betty. I don't want people just showing up at my house.
I know.
So Betty wasn't dressed, which was a big deal back then. Why I say wasn't dressed, she was in like just shorts and a tank top because she'd been doing housework.
Right.
She felt like she was a mess. So
she wasn't put together.
She answered the door and Candy's there looking, nice because she's been at Vacation Bible School. And so she feels a little awkward.
Yeah.
But she's not going to tell Candy to go away. They're friends. And she's like, sure, come on in. And Candy's like, I'm so sorry to come by unannounced. I just was thinking that the girls could have another sleepover tonight. We'll take the kids to the movie. Betty said, okay. And all we have, honestly, is Candy's story.
Right.
So that's what else I should say. Right now, at this point, everything I say is from Candy Montgomery. We don't know. Once Alan left, we don't know anything else.
All we have is Candy.
This is all I know.
Okay.
So she invites Candy in and says, do you want some coffee? And they sit down at the table and they just start talking, random things. And Candy says she starts telling Betty about the fact that her and her friend Sherry are going to open an interior design company. And she had just gotten business cards printed and she gave them to Betty. And it was just a normal conversation. And she said, where's the baby? I want to hold the baby. And she's like, oh, I just put her down for a nap. The whole reason she went over there is because if Alyssa was going to stay with them, Alyssa had a swimming lesson and she's like, I just came by. I need to pick up her swimsuit. Wylie, Texas was on the way to Plano. So she was going to stop real quick and pick up the swimsuit for Alyssa and then go to Plano, Texas to the Target to get some Father's Day cards because Father's Day was that Sunday. So that was the whole plan.
Yeah.
Candy had left the Vacation Bible School and thought she could stop there, go to Target, and get back before the puppet show that her kids were going to be participating in. Okay. So she was only planning it would be like an hour round trip and she'd be right back there. She told everybody she was going to Betty's house and going to Target.
Okay.
So while she's sitting there, she said that Betty had an odd look on her face and she didn't move. Her face was completely blank. And her eyes were kind of unfocused. And she just said, Candy, are you having an affair with Alan? And Candy, she said she was shocked. And she said, no, of course not.
But you were.
And then she said Betty squinted. And she got this she described it as a steeliness sounding to her voice. And she said, but you did, didn't you? And Candy said, yes. But it was a long time ago. And Candy said she was avoiding Betty's eyes. Betty said nothing. And she was just staring. And then Candy was like, did Alan tell you? And she looked up into Betty's face and there was no sign of anything. And then Betty said, wait a minute. And she got up from her chair and she walked into the utility room. Candy assumed she was just maybe going to get the swimsuit. She didn't really know. She was like kind of reeling because it caught her off guard. And she realized that she didn't really know what to say because she wasn't ready for this conversation.
You just got caught.
She said a few seconds later, Betty reappeared in the doorway of the utility room and she was clutching the handle of a 3-foot axe, the kind used for chopping heavy firewood. The way she was standing wasn't very threatening. She just kind of held the axe away from her body. And Candy was like, Betty, are you okay? And then Betty just said, don't see him again. And then Candy said, you know what? Under the circumstances, I think I'll just bring Alyssa home after Vacation Bible School and drop her off.
Yeah.
And then Betty, she said, kind of turned and she said, no, I don't want to see you anymore. Just keep Alyssa and take her to the movie because I don't want to look at you again. Bring her home tomorrow. Betty laid the axe down against the wall and walked past Candy into the middle of the living room. She kind of changed completely and said, I'm going to go get a towel from the bathroom and you can grab Alyssa's suit from the washer.
Which is in the utility room.
Right. Candy said all she wanted to do at that moment was get out of the house. She had a sick feeling in the pit of her stomach, but she went into the utility room and she said at that time, Betty reappeared behind her and said, don't forget Alyssa's peppermints. Betty seemed normal and she handed the towel over to Candy. And Candy said, that's okay. I have some peppermints at home. I'll make sure that she gets those.
What are the peppermints for?
So they give Alyssa peppermints because she doesn't like to put her face in the water when she's doing swimming lessons. And that was like the reward. If she makes it through, she would get peppermints.
Okay.
It's just a minor detail of the story.
Okay.
then Betty was very precise and she's like, no, she needs these specific peppermints. And she's like, let me go grab them. Like things seem normal. And this is when I think things go off the rails. Betty came back in with the handful of peppermints and Candy said her face just looked like it was full of pain, like she was hurting. And Candy said at that time she started realizing like what the affair did to her friend and she started feeling real guilt. And she knew when she left the house that Betty was going to just break down and cry because she had just confirmed that she had slept with her husband. And she reached out and she touched Betty on the arm and she said, I'm so sorry, Betty. And that's when she says that Betty erupted into a rage. Something snapped in Betty's brain and she flung Candy backwards, took her hand off of her, and she grabbed the axe. She started screaming, you can't have him. You can't have him. I'm going to have another baby and you can't have him this time. Come to find out, she thought she was pregnant at the time. And then Candy said, Betty, don't. This is stupid. I don't want Alan. And then a whole struggle ensued. She said that Betty told her that she was going to kill her. And then they grappled back and forth for control.
Man, all of this sounds like it happened because she's emotional, especially people who believe in, you know, this is my person. And then to have it confirmed in her depression and stuff like that, she could go into a moment of psychosis like that where she just snaps.
Right.
And she goes after Candy.
I know. It seems
but then
plausible.
It's the 41.
We're going to get into more of that when we get into the trial.
Okay.
And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here because I was thinking I was going to go through like how her body was found and all that. Now I'm just getting into what Candy is going to testify happened that day. So I'm a little out of order, but it's okay. I can make it work. I don't want to go into too much more of this because I want to go into why perhaps Candy went overboard when it came to overkill. So I'm going to wait a minute for that. But just know that a struggle ensued and it ended in Betty dying.
Wow.
Candy doesn't remember all of these details. What she remembers is going in and being confronted by Betty. Something happens. She's in, what is the word where you just go into kind of, it's almost like a blackout. I guess that's what it is.
Yeah.
A blackout rage or it's like a survival instinct or whatever.
Yeah.
So she remembers Betty coming at her and then she was just back in her car.
Oh.
And she's soaking wet and her toe is throbbing and she has blood dripping from a gash in the top of her head. And she said at that moment, she looked at her watch and it showed it was 10:20 and she was like, I have time to go to Target. But then she realized, oh wait, my watch actually stopped because she had gotten in a shower. That's why she was wet. She realized she has to get back to Bible school. She has no idea what time it is. And so she starts just kind of talking through like one foot in front of the other. I just got to drive somewhere. And she's like, okay, I can't go to Bible school in wet clothing. And she said she just kept pushing it kind of to the back of her mind what had just happened. And she's like, it's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. And she just drove home.
So she got into a shower with her clothes on after the incident?
Yes.
There? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And we'll go into more of those details in the trial because she doesn't remember all of this until some hypnosis happens to bring her back because it's a traumatic thing.
I feel like that lends to this explosive moment, definitely not premeditated because you don't take your clothing into the shower. That is a moment of having a breakdown of some kind.
Right.
To just go step into water. Even us today, we take showers sometimes and just stand there because we have to release. Like there's something we need from that water. So subconsciously, someone could go do that just in general.
Right.
Whether they remember it or not.
She gets back to her house and she realizes she needs to change out of her wet jeans and that her toe is sliced quite badly. So she bandages it up and she always wore flip-flops because this is a Texas thing. Everybody wears flip-flops.
Yeah.
So she changed into some blue tennis shoes to kind of hold her toe together because it was kind of falling apart.
Oh.
And she wrapped it in bandages. And in her mind, she was like, how did I hurt my toe? And she said, oh, I must have caught it on the screen door. So she almost starts telling herself these stories in her mind about what happened because she doesn't want to face what really just happened.
Yeah.
And then she took a shower. She got redressed. She threw her blouse, was a burgundy blouse. Somehow there was no blood on this blouse, but she just dried it in the dryer, put it right back on, and she went back to Bible school. She was late. She had missed the puppet show.
Oh.
And she had also missed setting up for like the lunch, like some of the things she was supposed to do. So people were questioning. They're like, where have you been?
Right.
You've been gone for 2.5 hours. You said you'd be back in an hour.
Yeah.
And then here was the story she told everyone. She said, well, I stopped by Betty's and we just got to talking and like time, got away from me. And then I ran to Target to get Father's Day cards. I looked at my watch and realized it had stopped and that I was probably going to be late getting back. So that was the story. And she would keep repeating the story and she would add a lot more details, which is what people do, I think, when they're trying to.
She's lying. She's making something up. But that proves to me that she had a blackout. Why the heck would you admit to literally everyone that you were at Betty's house if she knew that she had murdered Betty?
Good question. The other thing is that there was one woman who, I can't remember her name. I didn't write it down, but it was one of the church ladies. And she noticed that Candy wasn't wearing flip-flops. And she thought that was odd because Candy literally never wore anything but flip-flops. And she had seen her earlier that day. And now Candy was in blue tennis shoes. So she did notice that, but didn't think anything of it until later when she's questioned by the police.
Right.
So she goes about her day. She's kind of in this weird daze. She takes the kids home. She calls her husband, Pat. She says, we're going to the Empire Strikes Back tonight. Get some money, get the tickets. We'll meet you. She's literally driving around with Alyssa, Betty's daughter, in the back seat and just doing normal things.
Yeah.
While they're driving to the movies, she hears Alyssa mention her sister's name, Bethany. And that triggers something in Candy because she realizes she left Bethany at the house.
Alone. Wow.
In the crib. And she said that thought popped up into her brain, but like something in her just like pushed it down. Like, it's going to be okay. Alan will be home soon.
Alan's gone.
She doesn't know that. Actually, when she called Pat, she asked if he knew where Alan was working. And Pat was like, I don't know why. And she's like, no reason.
That's interesting she would ask that though, considering that Pat knows about the Alan affair. Like, why are you asking about Alan?
Yeah. Well, then Alan had been trying to call his wife all day. Remember, he had set these times. He knew she was nervous. So he called the house around 3 p.m. because that was when he was getting on the plane because he had gone to work all morning at the office and then he was going to get on the plane right after. And he called her to let her know he was about to get on the plane, but nobody answered at the house.
That's already making me really sad because this all happened around 10 a.m. Right? Yes. That means that poor baby's been in the crib already for like 5 hours.
Alan assumed when he called and she didn't answer that she was probably out walking with Bethany, which she did in the afternoon. So he was like, I'll just call when I get to the hotel. He tried again from the hotel and nobody answered. And by then it was becoming nighttime and he knew Betty would not go out at night. So
yeah, and considering how she was feeling about him being gone at all.
Yes.
Right.
Then he called his neighbor and he said, hey, I can't get a hold of Betty. Would you mind just walking over and seeing if you can, get her? And the neighbor walked over and knocked on the door and nobody answered. The garage was wide open. This is the other weird thing. It's nighttime. The garage is open and he only sees one car in the garage. So he comes back and he says, Alan, I think she's gone. There's only one car in the garage. Alan's like, this is really weird. My wife never leaves. But he's like, okay, well, thanks. He started to kind of worry.
But he's gone. So wouldn't the one car in the garage be hers left over?
Apparently not. There should be 2 cars in the garage.
Okay.
And all that was in there was his truck, according to the neighbor. So he tries again like an hour later and still nobody answers. So he calls the neighbor again and he says, I'm sorry to be a bother. Can you please just go over and check one more time? And when the neighbor goes back over, he actually walks into the garage and knocks on the utility door. And at that time he realizes both cars are in the garage. It's just that she had a small car, like a little Volkswagen Rabbit, and it was kind of hidden by the truck when he had looked in the first time. And so then he went back and he told Alan, he's like, both cars are there, but nobody's answering. And Alan's like, something's wrong.
Go inside, please.
And that's what he basically said.
Yeah.
He's like, get in the house however you can. It ends up, I'm not going to go through all of it, but at some point there's 3 neighbors involved. He calls a couple others because the first neighbor's like, I have kids at home, I can't go over there, and blah blah blah. Anyways, 3 of them end up going over to the house. The door's locked in the utility room. Then they go to the back door and they try to get in through the slider and they can't get in. And then they go to the front door and they're trying to get in through the front window. And then one of them just goes and tries the front door and it's fucking unlocked.
Oh my God.
These guys are spending an hour trying to break into a house and the front door is literally unlocked because when Candy left,
she can't lock it.
They went in and they said as soon as they walked in, they knew something was wrong. They could just feel it. They said the lights were on and they started going. They opened the first bedroom door and it was Alyssa's room. Nobody was in there. Nothing wrong. They opened the second door and they found Bethany.
Oh.
And she was completely hoarse from screaming.
Oh, poor
And they
baby.
immediately, and she was covered in her own feces and she had obviously been left there for a long time and they knew right then something was really fucking wrong.
Oh, poor baby.
And so one of the men grabbed the baby, took her over to his wife, and they called the police.
Yeah.
So one man left, and then the other two went into the master bedroom, didn't find anything, and then they went back to the kitchen. They saw some dark red oozing, and they knew something was wrong. And one of them opened the utility door and immediately was like, fuck, and closed it right away.
Yeah.
And told the other one, you don't want to go in there. She's dead. And he hadn't seen anything. He had just seen a puddle of blood.
Right.
And then the other guy, because sometimes when people tell you don't go in there, you want to go in there anyways, he opened it and he saw her and he said half of her head was missing. And his assumption was that she had blown her head off like a suicide.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that would make sense initially. Yeah.
And while they're there, they have just found Betty. The phone rings and they answer it and it's Alan. Oh. And Alan's like, what's going on? I haven't heard from you. And they're like, I don't know how to tell you this. The baby's fine. She's going to be fine. But Betty, she's been shot. That's what he told Alan.
Yeah.
So Alan's like, how? We don't have a gun in the house. And so all hell breaks loose. The police show up. They've never done a homicide investigation. We're in Wylie, Texas. They've literally never seen a murder. So same story as every case.
Because Wylie didn't exist until a couple of years ago when people started building houses there.
Probably. The crime scene was a madhouse. There was nobody there securing it. And also I was reading that police would hear about it. And because there had never been a homicide, they would just rush over there because everybody wanted to see it. Like,
yeah,
people are crazy. So they started doing the investigation. What they did find on the crime scene was that she had not been shot, but that she had actually been murdered, and the axe was still there. And there was a bloody fingerprint on the refrigerator freezer door inside of the utility room. And there was also a footprint. And what they saw right away is that the footprint was very small. Could their perpetrator be a woman?
And it was a flip-flop footprint.
It was a thong print. That's what they called it, a thong. I'm calling it a flip-flop because I don't like thong. I think of underwear.
Yeah, exactly.
And then they went into the guest bathroom and they found blood all over the bath mat and the shower or the bathtub. So they knew that whoever had killed her had gone and taken a shower, which they thought was really odd. Right. Initially, they were like, what kind of psycho are we dealing with here? Like, things didn't stay under wraps very long. Within like a few hours, there were reporters everywhere up and down the street, and they were reporting erroneous information.
Obviously.
First, it came out she was shot. Then it came out it was an axe. Like, everybody was just trying to be the first one out there with information. So this put the fear of God into everybody in the area. They all started locking their doors. Because this was an area people didn't. They said that there was like a rush at the local hardware store to buy heavier locks. People thought there was a killer on the loose, like some kind of
like the green
axe murdering
river killer or something like that.
Then the cops started getting all these crazy calls from people saying, yeah, I did it. I killed her.
We can't psychoanalyze every single human being, but I don't get those ones.
Yeah, so they were getting all these false leads and they didn't know where to go with it. But when they brought in the actual detectives from Dallas, because they knew they needed help, at least they acknowledged that, they realized the two things they had were the fingerprint and the footprint.
Right.
So they had good tangible evidence. And they found out that Candy Montgomery had come by the house at 10 a.m. The only other person that had anything to say was a little girl from the neighborhood that liked to play with Alyssa. She had come by the house as Candy was leaving because she told the cops that she saw a woman coming out the front door and get into a car. So she realized that somebody was home. And that's when she saw her opportunity to go get her friend Alyssa to play. And she said she went and knocked on the door, but nobody answered.
Okay.
So I think that was where the cops were like,
this is the time frame.
This is the time frame.
Right.
And I'm sure they did the death analysis. When they did the full analysis of how Betty died, they were able to see that it was 41 blows by the axe and that most of them happened while her heart was still beating.
Yikes.
It was brutal.
Is so much. I can't imagine that being anything but psychosis, you know? Like, this isn't a knife.
An axe. Can you imagine how heavy that is to take? Have you ever chopped wood?
I've tried.
It's heavy.
I know.
For Candy Montgomery to be able to do that 41 times, like raise it above her head and hack back down, she's not a big woman.
It sounds like
psychosis to me.
It does.
Anyways, we'll go back to the investigation. Of course, their first thought was it was Alan, because he's the husband.
He's gone.
And they did all the interrogation. They were able to prove he actually was out of the state, but that doesn't mean anything. He could have hired somebody. You know, they were looking into it.
That's true.
And they questioned him and they asked him, are there any affairs going on? And he told them no.
Well, there wasn't at the time.
Well, they said, has there ever been? Like, he should have told them. And then they brought Candy in for questioning, and they didn't suspect her at first. They were just asking her because they knew she had been there. And she, retold the whole story. Like she told everybody else, oh yeah, I just went there. I got the swimsuit. I left. My watch stopped, blah, blah, blah. And they weren't really looking at her closely, but they did ask her what shoes she was wearing that day. And she said, oh, blue tennis shoes.
Okay.
She knew.
And then that one woman was like, well, she was wearing flip-flops when she left the first time.
Something happened the next day after Alan Gore said that there was no affair. He realized Candy was going in for questioning too. And he thought, what if she says there was? That's going to make me look bad and they're going to come after me. So he called the cops first thing the next morning and said, I didn't tell you the whole truth. He said, I did have an affair and it was with Candy Montgomery. And that's when the cops were like, ding, ding, ding. Did they do this together? They thought maybe Alan and Candy, conspired to kill Betty together. He went out of town. She went over there. But why would she have told everyone she was going to Betty Gore's house?
She must have not known anything.
And premeditated murder, why would you choose an axe when you're in the kitchen where there's knives? But it's not even
her axe.
And it's not her. That's the other thing.
It's their axe. It would make sense only if the affair used to happen at the house. But it never did. It was always in hotels. So technically, she doesn't know about that. That's in a utility room.
Yeah.
That's not where Candy goes. So it makes sense that it is something that Betty brought out at some point or was already there, maybe from Alan doing something.
Here's one of my thoughts is Betty was home alone and she's paranoid. She's scared. She went and got the axe out of the garage and sat it in there for self-defense.
Something happened to that girl.
And then
it doesn't make sense to be that scared
of life
if he's not home.
So my thought is, because I used to do this when I was in college and my roommate would go away, I would sleep with a knife by my bed or I would sleep with wasp spray. So I was thinking the utility door is the way that you get into the house from the garage.
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me if she went and got the axe and set it by that door
just to be ready.
Another self-defense mechanism. To me, that's why the axe. And then when she had this confrontation with Candy, she went and grabbed it. And
it can't be premeditated. Something happened.
Yeah. So back to the investigation. Candy realized when they started questioning her and she found out that Alan had told them about the affair that she might be in trouble. And she hired a lawyer named Dan Crowder. He was a man that went to her church and he had no experience in criminal defense. Never done it. He was like a personal injury ambulance chaser kind of lawyer. He was just one of those guys that liked to hear himself talk. And I don't know why she chose him, probably just because he was convenient. But it ended up working in her favor.
Interesting. He might have been free. I don't know.
No, he wasn't.
Oh, really?
There was a lot of stories about how the Montgomerys had to use their title to their house and things to pay for lawyer fees and also for her bail bond.
Okay.
This was one of those cases that could really make a lawyer. It was the hottest case in the States at the time.
Yeah.
You had a housewife that everyone loved in the community now being charged with the murder of one of her closest friends.
And a heinous one at that.
With an axe. Like nobody would think to make this up. Of course, Dan Crowder, even though he had never done any kind of criminal defense, was like, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, a challenge. I think they might do a better job, to be honest.
Yeah, it's true. When it came out that she was the number one suspect, nobody believed it. There was like no way this young, attractive, small, petite woman could have done this.
Right.
That was one side of it. And then the other, she had really curly hair because that was a big thing of the day. She had just gotten a perm. For whatever reason, that was seen as like the looser women or like, and some people saw that, just made a judge of character. And they're like, of course she did it. Look at her. She's such a hussy or whatever. Anyways, there was a lot going around about it.
How dare you get a perm? That's like a nerdy thing to do, but okay.
So one of the things that Crowder did, which I think was really smart as her lawyer, as soon as he started seeing all that, he said, you need to change your hair. You need to look like the matronly little housewife.
And that
he
you're
said,
supposed to be.
Yes. And he also told her to lose weight. He's like, we need them to believe that there is no way you could hold an axe and strike somebody 41 times. So he's putting together her defense. Betty hasn't told anybody anything. She's denying at this point that she did it. She's brought in to be interrogated by the police, and they tell her that they are taking fingerprints from everyone who was at the scene so they can rule out friends and family. She gave them her fingerprints, and
That's how they got her.
They had the proof.
Is she still saying at this point she doesn't think she did it? Or
she's claiming innocence still at this point when she's brought in, because the cops can't bring her in for questioning several times. And she's like, I did not murder her. Her friends and family are asking. She's like, I did not murder Betty Gore. I was over there. I did not do this. So she's out there saying she did not do it.
Mm-hmm.
She tells Crowder about the fingerprint. He's like, I can't believe the cops did that. Like, that's against procedure, blah, blah, blah. At that point, she asked Pat to leave the room.
Oh.
And she confessed everything to her lawyer. She said, I killed Betty.
Oh.
I did it. It wasn't my fault. She came at me. And I don't know what happened after, but I killed her.
So she has the memory of her coming towards her, but after that.
Yes.
Right.
And she knows.
And she ended up in her car. That's what you said, right?
Don Crowder at that time is like, this was self-defense.
Okay.
She came at you first. You were just defending yourself. And he said, we need to know what really happened in that room that day. And Candy was like, I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
So he flew her to Houston to meet with a Houston psychiatrist, Dr. Fred Faison. He was versed in hypnosis.
Okay.
This is the guy that can maybe pull these memories out. And she was very susceptible to hypnosis. Not everyone is, but it seemed like it was easy for her to go into that state.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought her in, and it took several sessions, and he was able to pull out all the details, which I've already read to you guys.
Right.
Of what happened that day. He also got into some childhood pieces.
Trauma.
Because even if they found out that she was attacked by Betty and then she was able to wrestle the axe away, why would she have hit Betty 41 times?
Right.
I'm not going to go into every single detail. They detail every single axe swing in the trial.
This is because Jimmy said, you're leaving me. I don't like you. This one is because of this. Why would you do that? That's
the way that she did it. So first, Betty hit her or tried to swing at her, and it missed, but it hit her toe.
Oh.
So that's why her toe was hurt.
Right.
And then it stuck into the linoleum in the room. And at that time, Candy was able to wrestle the axe handle and then get control of it. There is a whole dramatized scene of this in the Love and Death miniseries that is reenacted.
Okay.
It's pretty painful to watch, but you can see it.
Okay.
They just go back and forth. And then when Candy finally gets it, there's some point where Betty tells her, shh, shush, because Candy was like, please don't do this to me, blah, blah, blah. So in the hypnotist's diagnosis of Candy, he brings back and finds this triggered memory of when she was a child in Italy. And there was this one time where she was hurt very badly. There was like a race, and like she was really angry because she lost the race. And then she got into a fight with this boy, and he cut her with a piece of glass, and she ended up in the emergency room, and they were giving her stitches, and she kept wanting to kick and scream and cry. And her mom, who she had a contentious relationship with, kept telling her, shush, the people out there will hear you. And the psychiatrist thinks there was something unlocked in her brain when Betty shushed her.
Possible.
Because when her mom shushed her, she had to hold in that pain and that trauma because she wasn't allowed to kick and scream. And when she was shushed again, he thinks it unlocked something where she just went
crazy,
ape shit, basically. And like, nobody's going to fucking shush me. And she was already high on adrenaline because she had been struggling and almost killed. Essentially, somebody just came at you. You don't know what's going to happen when you go into self-defense mode.
Yeah.
And she also said that Betty was standing up when she struck her. She said Betty kept coming at her. Betty was about twice the size. Like, she was a larger lady compared to Candy.
Okay.
And Candy, you know, with an axe, you can't probably aim very well. She didn't hit her in the place to kill her.
Swinging.
The human body can be crazy. We've seen it in horror
with adrenaline.
Movies. She didn't go down easily, and Candy had to keep hitting her until she fell down.
Oh.
And then I think she was just so scared for her life, she just kept going to make sure.
We've seen this, and it has been reenacted in so many movies.
Yeah.
Just because you hit multiple times does not mean anything. Sometimes it's just exactly that. You are scared for your life. Someone was just trying to kill you. And so you make sure that the threat is gone. And it's not even in your brain that you're trying to make sure the threat is gone. Something else takes over.
Yes. And I think that's what happened. She full on snapped. She went into a blackout, and they said the adrenaline allowed this tiny little woman to, because what else would explain how you could do it 41 times? And they said they think she did it to the point of exhaustion. 41 strikes was the most her body could even do.
Right.
And at that point, she just kind of let the axe go.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then she kind of snapped to it and she looked down and then she went into the shower and she just started trying to get the blood off of her.
Trying to clean.
She also grabbed 2 towels from the bathroom and went back into the utility room and tried to scrub up the blood from the floor and then just realized it was not going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, she just kind of left in a daze. She just went out the front door, which to me, this all makes sense.
Yeah.
Like,
she made a mess. She's like, I have to
clean this up.
Do something. I gotta, but then it's like,
she's like, I need to go shower.
What's the purpose?
But she didn't even take her clothes off.
Right. This is a complete separation
of mind and body.
Right. Exactly.
And she just wandered out the front door and got in her car.
Yeah.
And left the front door unlocked. She didn't try to cover her tracks. She didn't do anything with the axe. She left a footprint and a thumbprint. She didn't even remember that the baby was there. Yeah. I don't know that that's Candy's character.
No.
If she wasn't in that state, I don't think she would have left the baby there.
If anything, I don't think she would have. Yeah. She might have taken the baby with her.
Well, and a lot of people.
If she were to like go into the room and be like, oh, there's a baby I can see in her dazed state, she'd be like, pick up the baby, take it with me.
But the baby was sleeping, so she didn't maybe remember. I don't know. But a lot of people, if you read Reddit threads, will say that Candy is a uncaring, cold person to have left the baby there. I don't think she was in the mental state to even remember there was a baby there, quite honestly.
Yes.
So I don't know. I can't agree with that. It gets out there that she is going to be confessing and claiming that she did kill Betty Gore. And that became an even bigger sensation. They're like, oh my God. And it also came out that she had an affair with Alan at that point, and people were really mean.
I get it.
We know how the media likes to spin things. This is a great story. They made it into a love triangle, and that's what everyone thought it was, is like this was a bitter, jealous lover who came and killed the wife of her affair partner or whatever. It was really big news out there. Still is, I guess, for some people. They still believe that she did it in malice. But they got the jury together. Don Crowder did try and get the venue moved. He did not want it to be in Collin County because they didn't deal with murder there. It was a bunch of small town people. They all knew the case, and he said she's not going to get a fair shake. We need to go to like Houston or Dallas where like murder happens all the time, and the jury people are going to be more familiar with some of the concepts we're going to be bringing up.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't able to get it moved, and it did happen in Collin County.
Okay.
But in my opinion, it probably helped Candy. Because I think there was a lot of people that knew her. They knew she was this like kind woman that worked in the church. Like there was no reason for anyone to see. Like she'd never been an angry person. She had never been violent. There was nothing in her nature to become like an axe murderer.
Right.
The jury had mostly women. I believe it was like only 3 men. A lot of times women are harder on other women when it comes to cases like this. I'm not going to go through all of the trial. It's really long. It was one of the hot ticket items. Like people would show up on the court steps at like 5 a.m. to try and get tickets to go inside.
Yeah, like Lacey and Scott.
Yeah. And it was a lot of housewives that wanted to go in. They wanted to hear all the sordid details about the affair. I don't know. It was just morbid curiosity once again.
Well, and she was a celebrity, especially if a lot of them knew her personally.
The prosecution came out and tried to attack her character based on the fact that she had an affair, and they questioned if she'd had other affairs. And during the trial, it did come out about her affair with Richard. This is one of the points that really, really bothered me on the miniseries, and I want to make sure everybody knows this for sure. She did not sleep with her best friend's husband. Sherry Kleckler was her best friend. Sherry was married, and in the miniseries, they say that she slept with Sherry's husband. She did not.
Oh, interesting. Why would they say that? I think that
people, well, they insinuated it in the miniseries because when they asked Candy who else she had an affair with, she said on the stand, I'm not going to reveal his name. That isn't relevant to this case, and I don't want to upset his family. And so she says that in the miniseries, and then they show Sherry Kleckler getting all upset and like running out and like not wanting to talk to her friend. So they insinuate that she was sleeping with her best friend's husband. It wasn't.
Why would Sherry get all upset? She's the one that went out with her.
Yeah, and the truth is it was just some random guy. It was not her best friend's husband. She was not sleeping with all of her friends' husbands. People on Reddit will bring that up because they want to say Candy's character is that she was just this hussy that was sleeping with all her friends' husbands. So of course she would murder them. I don't know how you make that connection, but
No.
The final day of the trial, Candy got up there as the star witness, I guess, for the defense. And she was the one that went through everything I told you about what happened that day.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really what turned everything for her, because she admitted to what happened,
right,
and how it happened.
Right.
And at one point, Don Crowder brought the actual axe out, and he did this kind of as a stunt. They say,
hold it up against her body and show how big it is compared to her.
He held it up and he said, "Is this the axe that you used to kill your friend Betty Gore?" And it was like this like crazy moment. And she started crying and she like shrunk back and she's like, "Yes, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it." Oh. And a lot of people say that's what really convinced them.
Mm-hmm.
This one's controversial because then other people say that she was acting and that this was like all staged to get sympathy for Candy so that she would get off. None of this was filmed. There's no like videos of this. That was back in the 80s. So we can't watch this, but I can tell you that they went in. Her testimony ended on a Friday, and then they reconvened on the following Wednesday for final arguments from the lawyers that come in and make their final plea. And they thought the verdict would take a while. They're like, there's no way. And they came back within the same afternoon. The jury came back and said,
"Oh, wow,
not guilty."
Oh, okay.
And I think this is where the state might have messed up, is that they did charge her with first-degree premeditated murder. Like,
oh, yeah. No, because it wasn't premeditated.
No way.
If they just said first degree murder.
But then the jury also talked about, lesser charges, because usually they take it at the highest charge and then you can do lesser. And they discussed manslaughter and they decided she wasn't guilty of anything because they felt like it truly was self-defense and that she would not have gone to that extreme if Betty had not come at her first with an axe.
Seems pretty likely. I mean, just from what I know now.
Well, the other problem that I need to bring up is that Betty, her character was kind of crucified. And this part makes me really sad about this trial because I do believe that Candy probably did not mean to kill her. I don't think that.
No, she came for a swimsuit, it sounds like.
Yeah, I struggle with it because it's like she killed her in a really brutal way. Should she completely walk free? I don't know. Because other people have killed people in self-defense and gone to jail. So
it's true, but that's based off of someone's idea of that person. And if they are a threat to society after that.
That's true. That's the whole purpose. Candy was not a threat to society. And actually in the closing arguments, Don Crowder brought it up. He said, this is already tragic enough. He's like, we've got two girls that are going to grow up without a mom now because Betty Gore is dead. He's like, don't take these other two children's mom away from them when it comes to Candy. Don't break up another family. We already have one grieving. Why should we make it two? This was just a horrible misunderstanding. And I think that resonated. And also the fact that they brought up how hard Betty was to like in the community. And they did this whole, which I hate, comparison between
character thing as well.
Between Betty and Candy. And they even had people come in and talk about how Betty was mean to her students. And they had people come in.
Fuck? She's the victim.
She don't do that.
They're trying to prove why she
deserved to be
exactly
killed. That's how I felt when I read this. So
you don't do that.
I have to bring it up because it made me really sad because...
Well, I get it in a way if the whole point is to prove self-defense, why it got to a point where Candy had to defend herself.
That's true.
And that Betty is an aggressor. That's why they do that.
Yes.
But all of it's just so fucked up.
This is just a sad story. And it really makes me sad because Betty's parents came to the trial and they had to hear these things about their daughter. And her dad was like, she was such a happy, vivacious girl. And how did she turn into this sullen...
married Alan.
And here was the other fucked up part of this. So speaking of Alan, is he testified about the day that it happened. And they said he was so monotone and like he didn't even give a flying fuck that his wife was dead. They said there was no emotion shown from Alan. And Betty's parents were really, really disturbed by how callous Alan seemed.
As we've already determined, Alan doesn't really show emotions.
Let me tell you something else about Alan because I kind of think he's a piece of shit. He had a woman from the church. Her name was Elaine, and she had just gone through a divorce. And when Betty was killed, she started calling Alan and offering to come over and cook dinner for him and the girls.
Oh, that's such a churchy thing to do.
She started spending the night over there. She was over there till 1 a.m. And just 3 months after the trial, Alan got married to this woman.
Okay.
And I'm getting ahead of myself here, but it makes me so mad. The 2 girls that Alan and Betty had, it's like he didn't want to be a father anymore. They actually got adopted by Betty's parents. So,
well, I'm happy for that.
Me too. And the girls are fine now, but they talk about their dad. They don't have a relationship with their dad. And they said the woman he married, Elaine, was really mean to them and would like comb their hair until they had like pieces missing and wouldn't feed them, like real abusive shit.
Yeah.
That's why I question. I don't know that Alan ever really loved Betty. And she was such this like shining light when she was young until she met Alan.
Right.
So what the fuck was he doing in that closed house that we don't know about?
Just super controlling. Sounds like just super duper control. And that would actually make sense that the trauma that she experienced with him leaving was the trauma that he created for her, because it's almost like that syndrome when you get abducted and what is it?
Stockholm syndrome?
Yeah, it's almost like this Stockholm syndrome situation that when he actually has to leave, she's freaking out because she doesn't know how to act without him there.
Maybe
I just
that's
feel like
the
case.
There's more to this story that we'll never know because Betty's dead and we don't know her side. The fact that he was married again that quickly after his wife was brutally murdered by the woman he had an affair with. Like, to me, if anyone's a sociopath, it's fucking Alan Gore.
Yeah.
He has no emotion. That's not a normal
No, it's not a normal
person.
reaction.
And he didn't even love his kids.
The very fact that he gave up adoption of his own children.
So yeah, that's the story. She was found not guilty. Pat stood by her through all of this.
Wow. Pat's the man hero in all of this.
He had to sit there and hear that his wife had another affair.
Yeah, poor guy.
He had to shield their children from all of this. Their children are okay now. That's a good thing. But I did want to just give a quick update where everyone is today. So Pat and Candy, right after the trial,
moved.
They were broke. They had to give up their house and try and rebuild. She was very notorious in the area and they got out of Texas. They moved to Georgia.
Right.
They divorced right after.
Okay. Oh, it makes sense.
It'd be hard to
you can't
live through that. Like,
no.
That's a lot of trauma.
They were
for
already
marriage.
trying to mend their marriage before.
Right.
I can't survive that.
Yeah. No. But they were good co-parents and it sounds like their kids grew up, Jenny and Ian, to be good people. Candy changed her name back to Candace Wheeler and she's actually a family therapist nowadays in Georgia. She works with other people who have gone through trauma. She feels like that hypnosis session and really understanding herself and like what happened during that blackout. She wanted to understand more of that and she became a therapist. And actually her daughter, Jenny, also works with her. Like they have a practice together and her daughter focuses on teen and adult depression.
Wow.
So that's where Candy is. As I said, Alan remarried Elaine Williams. They eventually got divorced and I believe Alan got married a couple other times. He's now living in Maine and married to another woman, probably being horrible to her too. The girls, like I said, they have no real contact with their dad anymore. So Bethany and Alyssa grew up with their grandparents in Kansas and are great young ladies nowadays. They stay out of the spotlight, obviously.
It's Betty's parents, though,
yeah,
right?
Betty's parents in
that's
Kansas. Good. I know it's Bertha. I can't remember his name right now, but the Pomeroys.
The Pomeroys.
And he, like the way he was described, he was just like this big, burly, soft teddy bear of a man.
Like a teddy bear, yeah.
So I'm sure they were wonderful parents to Betty's kids. But they never got over it. Her dad never cried. He was one of those men that was very stoic and didn't show a lot of emotion like most men at that time. But like losing Betty like broke him like nothing else. He was just heartbroken. So in a way, I feel like them getting the 2 girls to raise probably helped them heal.
Huge.
Yeah.
They lose their only girl, but at least they got the girls because if Alan kept them, they probably had nothing.
No.
After that.
And they had to sit there and listen to people crucify their daughter.
Yeah, that's hard.
And come to realize that this man that she married was a piece of shit. And Don Crowder, this was his first big case. And after he won for self-defense, he became kind of like this
hotshot.
Yeah. He actually ran for governor of Texas in 1986. So just 5 or 6 years after the trial. He got about 11% of the vote, but he ultimately lost the race. This is kind of sad. He spiraled into depression and became an alcoholic. And actually just 2 years later, after losing the race for Texas governor, he committed suicide.
Well, damn.
So not a good ending for Don Crowder. Couldn't handle the fame, maybe?
Couldn't handle the rejection.
The rejection, yeah. It's
hard to have a lot of fame really quickly and then it dissipate and you can't get it back.
That's true. You're chasing the high.
Right.
That's probably exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, to me, this is just a tragic story of two women who are unsatisfied in where their life was. And
for a while, two oblivious men.
And they were surrounded. Yeah, I think Pat was a better husband.
But he was still oblivious.
But he was oblivious.
Right, until it came to the forefront.
And there were parts when you watch the miniseries and things that were in the book that will tell you that Pat was not the most attentive. Like Candy was a very creative person. Like she was in all these creative writing classes and she was trying to get Pat to like read her stuff and he wouldn't. Like he had no interest in it. He's like, I don't understand it. I don't get it. And so yeah, Candy was missing out. Mm-hmm. So I understand. But then she reached out to like the worst possible guy to have an affair with.
Well, because she bumped into him and there was fairy dust for some reason.
And she had no idea how that would affect Betty and that Betty was already spiraling as hard as she was.
She might have not known that Betty was as depressed as she was at the time and how she would have been affected by hearing anything at all.
She didn't. And a lot of people think that when Candy touched Betty to say, I'm so sorry, that's when Betty was like...
That was the trigger for Betty.
Yes, exactly.
Being touched was the trigger for Betty and being shushed was the trigger for Candy.
Yeah. So we have this tragedy that happened.
Two women off their rockers in the last minute. Fuck, it's hard being a woman and a housewife and all the things.
So much pressure.
So much pressure.
And I also bring up, to me, this is scary in a way because we don't know what could push us to kill somebody.
We don't.
And when you truly feel threatened for your life, you don't know how you're going to react. And
you don't.
Candy had no idea. She unfortunately reacted in a very violent way that ended up in the death of her friend. She regrets that. Yeah. And she has to live with that her whole life. I saw where Dawn Crowder said she may not have gone to prison, but she's in her own prison for the rest of her life.
Right. Yeah.
And so you can't discount that. Mm-hmm. Like she has to live with the fact that she did that.
And she's trying to repay in her way.
I think
her
so.
And her daughter trying to help families in crisis.
And the other reason I support the self-defense and that I don't think Candy did it is she never tried to seek fame or, she
didn't write a book.
No, she never wrote a book. Mm-hmm. She never did interviews. She slipped away into obscurity.
Yeah.
She just wanted to go live a life with her kids and just be gone.
Right.
Other people in this situation might have taken that as a way to make money or...
Yeah, we've seen it.
Because some people will try and diagnose her as a narcissist and other things. And I don't see it from what I've done.
I don't see it yet either.
There was also thoughts that perhaps Betty was undiagnosed with bipolar disorder, which...
I mean, it sounds like she could have had that. Yeah.
I think these women were just
overlooked.
And that's my happy story.
Yeah, I had not heard this one before.
This is a wild one because you're like, how can somebody get away with self-defense with an axe murder?
Axe hits.
But when you really get into the nitty-gritty of it all, it just makes sense to me.
It does. It does make sense to me too.
And I would love to hear comments.
Everybody just wants someone to be so freaking guilty in every case. That's what people want. So when you go into like Reddit threads and stuff, they're so guilty. I'm like, that we live on this massive spectrum of behavior and things that affect that behavior and how things come about. You can't do that. No. You can't just be like, she's so guilty.
She's in this box.
Right. No, it doesn't work that way.
It's all gray.
We are very complicated. Everything about us, every decision we make and every moment of the day. And then when you put two people together, complicated. Add two more people. Whoa.
Oh, yes.
Add three more people. Whoa. There's so many things that affect everything. And it is not black and white.
No. And then you add in intimate relationships and
that's what I'm
love
saying.
And jealousy and oh my God, I don't know what could have happened differently. I'm sure Candy every day thinks, what if I didn't go over there?
That is the main butterfly effect. She wanted to keep her for an extra day to take her to the movie because she felt Alyssa was being left out.
You're right. And
but she already knew that Alyssa wasn't really allowed to go. She already overstepped having an affair with this woman's husband.
Right. Don't fuck with her kids too.
Exactly.
You're right.
The butterfly effect was leaving
and going
the
there
church group unannounced, going to Betty.
Who knows what Betty's mental state was at that time when she already, her husband's already left. Mm-hmm. She suspects that Candy's had an affair. And now Candy's coming over and basically saying, I'm going to take your daughter to a movie that I know you don't want. All of those things combined.
Yes, I did have an affair. Whoa, that's a huge explosion of emotion and feelings. And
yeah, if Candy had gone on any other day, it probably would have been fine. It was the day Alan had left for the first time since Bethany had been born.
Right.
Was this just supposed to happen?
That's when you ask those questions.
Right.
Because it's like all these things led up to this happening in that moment. It's destiny.
It does make you wonder.
Again, the butterfly effect. She could have not gone. Betty would be alive today. It might have exploded in a different way down the road.
True. It could have been
not been murder.
Once again, I'll remind everyone, we only know Candy's story.
Yeah.
We only know her side. She may not know anything, but I feel like it was pulled out in hypnosis, so it's probably what happened.
Right.
Some people don't believe in hypnosis. That's what else I found in Reddit. So they think it's voodoo, magic, science.
I feel like that is naive.
Yes.
You know, I say I'm naive in a lot of ways, but to not believe in hypnosis, I'm sorry. We are more than capable of being subdued in one way or another.
And we know that we all repress things that are traumatic.
Absolutely. I've done hypnosis. You can't easily take me down. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean I don't believe that it works. Anyway, whoa.
Whoa.
Well, I'm very sad for Betty's life.
Me too.
And that it ended that way because growing up, she seemed fantastic.
I just feel like she had a very sad life.
It was snuffed out when she married a man.
In the story.
End of story.
She had so much going for her, and then she married a man. And she never had time to turn it around. Like so many of us make the wrong decisions with marrying someone young, but we turn it around later in life. And she was 30 years old when she died. She didn't have that chance.
Yeah. She was kind of in the middle of one of the steps, right? When she felt really alone. He didn't love her anymore. Her next step probably would have been like a couple years down the road. I'm going to leave him. This isn't working. I know that I'm worth more than this. Like she was in the middle.
Right. Okay.
Moral of the story, don't marry men. Be a lesbian or just, I don't know, have cats.
Be single.
Dogs. Wine. Go to Italy.
Yes.
Sit in the sun. Sit on
Do
some
things
boats.
that you love. Life is short. You never know when someone could show up and
Axe you.
axe murder you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an axe?
No, I don't because I have
we're
no
safe.
wood.
I don't own one either. So I'm like, who has an axe? They lived in the
with
country.
wood. Now I feel like I should get an axe, but I should hide it. It should be like put away in like some kind of sleeve, like a gun.
It can be used against you just like a gun.
End of the world, it makes sense to have an axe.
Except for if a man came at me, he would easily pull it away from me.
No, that's when you put a suck on it. Remember?
Oh, yeah. We
Have
saw
you ever
that.
heard this?
Yes.
So
you're supposed to do that with a baseball bat.
If you don't know this stuff, let's say you have a baseball bat or something in your house that you're trying to swing, a man can easily grab it and take it away from you. But if you put a sock at the end, it could still cause damage, hurt them. But if they're the type that are going to try and grab it, what they're going to grab is the sock, and it gives you a split second to smack them again.
Yes. Do it. We are saving lives here.
Yes, we are.
That's what this is all about. Well, thank you for listening. This is a long one.
It was a good one.
It was one that enthralled me. When I watched this miniseries, I'm like, I got to talk about this. Well, you guys know where to find us. We are on all the socials, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube, all at Lucid Lab Podcast, one word.
Yep. And please send in your lab reports or mini episode suggestions to lucidlabpodcast@gmail.com. We haven't said this in a while. If you want to mail something, P.O. Box.
Go for it.
P.O. Box 251, Eastlake, Colorado 80614.
So moral of the story, if you want to have an affair,
go to a bar, but make sure he's not creepy. He's going to kill you. I don't know.
That's true.
There's all kinds of bad things in this entire episode.
Maybe don't have an affair.
Don't have an affair.
Get a vibrator.
Yes, do that. And some weed. I don't know.
Wine.
Weed and wine and vibrators.
And then nobody will axe murder you.
Exactly. You'll just pass out. And then you'll wake up and it's still vibrating. It's like falling off the bed because it found its way out at one point.
It's like out in the hall.
Jeez. Oh boy. How did we get here? Anyway.
In the meantime,
Stay lucid, babies.
always. Bye-bye.
Always goodbye.